Mayor Regina Romero,
Here.
Supervisor Rex Scott,
Here.
and Mr. Ted Maxwell.
Great, thank you. And if everybody will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next is call to the audience for the PAG meeting. Speakers are limited to a 3-minute oral presentation, telephonically subject to technical availability. You may submit comments any length, council later, and limited to 30 minutes in total. I don't have any for the PAG meeting. Jackie, do you have any comments and stuff?
None.
No. Okay. I will move on from call to the audience to approval of the consent agenda. At this time, I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
Those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Next is item number 5, Sonoran Corridor Project Update. And Mr. Ellis from PAG will introduce our guest and proceed.
Mr. Chair and members of the council, it's good to see you. Good afternoon to you. The Tier 1 EIS effort for the Sonoran Corridor Project has been recently completed. And we wanted to come to you, give you a few minutes to share the updates, share what's been done, and to kind of how we wrapped up the overall effort on this. We asked Carlos Lopez, who is ADOT's Corridor Planning Manager, to join us virtually, and he'll be giving the presentation on this particular topic. Carlos, are you able to hear us okay?
Hi, Rick. And
What's going on, my friend? The floor is all yours. Please go ahead.
thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, members of council, thank you for this opportunity to give an update on the recent completion of the Sonoran Corridor Tier 1 Environmental Impact Statement. Having some issues with my camera, apologies. I'm not able to turn it on, but I'll go ahead and share my screen with the presentation for today.
Mr. Chair, can we make sure that the audio is a little higher?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Can you speak maybe closer first to your microphone to see if that helps?
Testing. Is that a little better?
A little bit better.
Testing?
Just stay close to it.
Okay.
If you
Thank
would.
you. One second. Having a
It's much harder to
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still there,
Sorry.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm just having an issue here with the sharing the screen, so I
Was this the screen? His screen we're
Carlos?
seeing right now?
I
or-
have your slides.
Not
Yeah.
sure.
We'll use
Okay.
those
Yeah.
instead.
can we use those?
Yep, if you click on the screen with your mouse, and then you can use the arrows to control it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
That advanced.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you again for this opportunity. I am joined by my colleague Tremaine Wilson with the Federal Highway Administration. Federal Highway was the lead agency and approved the completion of this effort. Also like to give a shout out to our team members, Emin Heyer, Sam Patton, Sarah Karras, and Joanna Bradley in the project management team. And so for today, the agenda is to discuss background, study area, study purpose for the proposed Sonoran Corridor. We'll highlight process and timeline that we followed on the project, highlight the completion of the final Tier 1 Environmental Impact Statement, and then discuss the phased implementation plan that was developed as part of this project and future Tier 2 study considerations. Starting off with project background, the Sonoran Corridor was designated by Congress in the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act as a high priority corridor in 2015. This environmental study led by the Federal Highway Administration issued the notice of intent in 2017, with 5 cooperating agencies serving on the project listed on the slide, and also 36 agencies serving as participating agencies, including the Pima Association of Governments and member agencies. ADOT is following a tiered environmental review process for the Sonoran Corridor, which includes this completion of a tier 1 and a subsequent tier 2. And this is based on the complexity in planning for the future interstate of the Sonoran Corridor and also fiscal constraint. This is our project study area, and highlighted on the western boundary with Interstate 19, to the east, Interstate 10, and to the south, highlighting near the southern boundary in the town of Sahuarita. And so this is the focus area as the study team plan for the connection of the Sonoran Corridor, connecting I-19 to I-10 south of the Tucson International Airport. We'll highlight the study process that was developed as part of the project to provide high capacity, access controlled transportation facility and future interstate. And so the study purpose of the Sonoran Corridor is to improve access to the new high growth areas and existing activity centers within the study area, to provide an alternative option to provide a direct connection between I-10 and I-19 south of the airport, and also to reduce congestion and improve the forecast year of 2045 and the traffic level of service within the study area. The project timeline that the study team followed, again, the notice of intent was issued in 2017. First activity as a project team was to conduct a public and agency scoping meetings to identify transportation needs and issues within the study area. Also in 2017, based on that input, we developed a project purpose and need and proposed alternatives, which were presented to the public in 2018. Based on the feedback that we received on the alternatives and technical analysis, that was narrowed down to 3 alternatives documented in a corridor selection report. And similarly, the study team held a public meeting on the proposed 3 alternatives of March 2019, which then led to a draft tier 1 environmental impact statement with a preferred alternative November of 2020, followed by public hearings and the recent completion with the final tier 1 and record of decision. And so what we wanted to highlight is our study team's approach, which we coordinated with PAG throughout this process at each major milestone, conducting the public and agency outreach throughout this process. The draft tier 1 environmental impact statement was a major milestone when that was published with a preferred alternative for the public and agency review, again, published in November of 2020, with a comment period going through January 8, 2021. There was a public hearing in Tucson held December 1st, 2020, and also a web-based virtual meeting held on December 3rd. Over 100 comments were received based on the draft and preferred alternative, and those were addressed as part of the final environmental impact statement. Here's a graphic of the preferred corridor alternative that's been identified as part of the project. Starting on the west at I-19, just south of El Toro Road, the Sonoran Corridor would head east towards Alvernon Way, and then head north along Alvernon Way near the Aerospace Parkway and Old Vale Road connection. It would head east again towards I-10 and Rita Road, connecting with a connection to I-10 at Rita Road. And so this was the corridor alternative that was identified in the draft and also approved as part of the final environmental impact statement. The final environmental impact statement and record of decision, again, signed by the Federal Highway Administration, was issued this past November 5th, 2021, with the selection of alternative 7 and also the comment resolution process in addressing the comments received during the draft version. The final Tier 1 environmental impact statement makes a selection of alternative 7. And so as part of this Tier 1 process, the study team also identified a phased implementation plan as part of the Tier 1 process. And so this is a initial strategy in terms of looking at opportunities to break down the corridor into implementation phases as funding gets identified. And so this graphic identifies a phase 1, basically starting from north to south. So phase 1 in the green from the Tucson International Airport or heading east to I-10 and Rita Road along the Old Vale Road connection. Phase 2 in the yellow connects, it's the segment that connects Sahuarita Road heading north towards in the vicinity along Alvernon Way to the Aerospace Parkway. And then phase 3 in the orange, it's the connection near in the town of Sahuarita, just south of El Toro Road at I-19, heading east to Sahuarita Road. And so again, this is an initial phased implementation plan that will be continued to be coordinated with the Pima Association of Governments. Just some additional information regarding each of the phases that we included here as far as the length of each phase and looking at what is it connecting. And so phase 1, as mentioned, in the vicinity of the airport to I-10 and Rita Road, 6.7 miles long. And so we also estimated a cost for this future interstate facility in the range of $360 to $400 million. And so this would be for phase 1. Phase 2, again, it's that segment, that middle segment, just over 8 miles, connecting the Tucson International Airport heading south to Sahuarita Road along Alvernon with an estimated cost of $170 to $200 million. And phase 3 near or in the town of Sahuarita, again, connecting that segment from I-19 south of El Toro Road, heading east towards Sahuarita Road with the estimated cost for this phase, $430 to $480 million. So as I mentioned earlier, ADOT is following a tiered environmental review process. Now that the Tier 1 has been completed, there's an initial concept of a phased implementation plan. And so we also wanted to offer Tier 2 considerations. And so here's some major or some highlights. A Tier 2 environmental study can be approved if the project is consistent with the fiscally constrained metropolitan transportation plan, such as PAG's RMAP, or Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan. A tier 2 can be approved if it has at least one subsequent phase, such as design, right-of-way construction of the project in the transportation improvement program. And it also has the funding needed to advance the project, including the funding source and the appropriate amounts. In addition, tier 2 considerations, the segments identified need to have independent utility that would serve the purpose and need of the Sonoran corridor, even if no other work is completed. They also need logical termini, a rational beginning and endpoint, such as a major road, interstate, airport, which were incorporated into the phased implementation plan. Lastly, a tier 2 environmental study is valid for 3 years for the subsequent phase. If 3 years do go by and there's no action, then that would result in a reevaluation of that tier 2 to make sure the analysis and recommendations are still valid. So with that, again, thank you for this opportunity to give an update, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Anybody have any questions? I'd start it off with the infrastructure package that, the bipartisan bill that's coming out. Is this the type of thing that we would be looking towards for the first phase, or would it be the next RTA? Or because if you add those figures up, I looked in my back pocket and I don't have that much change.
I have $1 billion.
I don't have $1 billion. So with all these packages, out there, how would we follow this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the council. Again, thanks to ADOT for getting us to this point. $1.1 billion is roughly what we're looking at for all 3 phases. As Carlos mentioned, it's more realistic to do individual phases. So even the first phase that's being recommended is in the $200 million range. That is still a significant amount of the regional funds to be able to program it and be able to have the funding in place. That's where, as you mentioned, those competitive grants and those opportunities come in to be able to collaborate with ADOT. This is ADOT facility, so we need to collaborate with ADOT, identify it as a priority, and then be able to hopefully compete for those grants.
I noticed if you do the tier 2, it's only valid for 3 years. So not having at least the potential for the money seems like it'd be a waste to do the tier 2 until you had some kind of funding structure in place.
Exactly. And typically, as Carlos mentioned, you don't even start a tier 2 until you have a fiscally constrained phase programmed.
Right. Okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Carlos, thank you so much for the presentation. Explain to me the discoveries of the first phase of EIS that arrived to the alternative that we have in front of us today. Because I know that there were final 3 alternatives. And so I just want to know what the constraints were of the other alternatives, what was taken into account, and what discoveries, especially environmental discoveries, were found.
Were you able to hear that question?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, thank you for that question. Let me go back to, if I can. Well, I was going to go back again to that slide where we highlighted the purpose of the Sonoran corridor, purpose and need of the Sonoran corridor that focused on access, connectivity, improving traffic level of service for the next 20 years. And so that set a goals and objectives for the project as we started looking at alternatives. Which one of these alternatives best meets the established purpose and need of the project. And so that process got narrowed down to three alternatives that you alluded to and were studied and documented. And what we found out is, as we started doing our technical analysis, those alternatives that connected to the northern part of the study area near the airport had a higher traffic volume and had a higher rating in terms of providing that better level of service for traffic and addressing some of the mobility issues and connectivity issues. So that was one point that, again, those alternatives to the north offered those benefits. As we looked at environmental considerations, obviously there's no interstate proposed interstate now and in this region. And so we work with our federal partners, including Environmental Protection Agency, Arizona Game and Fish with the state, Bureau of Reclamation, to understand the level of effects and impacts that a future interstate would have in this region. There's a lot of drainage
I'm sorry,
facility.
Carlos, hold on just a second. Can we have whomever's doing the slides, put the map on? The map, so that I know that you're talking, north and south and, yeah, there it is. Can you see that, Carlos?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So start that thought again. And the preferred alternative, that's when you were saying you were working with the federal government to look at the environmental impacts?
Yes.
Okay.
And so as we looked at, again, from a traffic perspective, this preferred alternative had a high rating due to providing that connectivity and access. From an environmental standpoint, all of the alternatives were similar in the sense of environmental effects, being that the alternatives were proposing a new freeway. There's no freeway now. And so the alternatives had similar effects. One of them did propose to connect in the San Javier district to Honoatam Nation, in which we worked from the beginning of the project. We worked with the nation and the district and to look at the feasibility of connecting in tribal land. We work with their tribal historic preservation officer, again, to look into potential opportunities, landowner meetings with the Alatis in tribal land. So that was also part of the process and information that we gathered in order for the study team to make a decision. Ultimately, the connection in the town of Sahuarita, south of El Toro Road, was selected based on, again, the environmental engineering factors for future development.
Alrighty. And so as we think about this northern corridor, there are certain needs that I-19 has in terms of being able to carry additional, especially commercial traffic. I know it's not part of this particular presentation, but I have a couple of questions. There are certain needs on I-19. In other words, maybe adding another lane on each side. And there are certain needs on I-10 East to carry additional load. So in order to be able to have a balanced interstate system to add more capacity with this northern corridor, are there any future plans from ADOT to add capacity in the way of lanes to I-19 and I-10 East.
Mr. Chair, Carlos, this is Ted Maxwell. I think I can address some of that. We've talked about in the past the current 5-year plan. And we've pointed out that in fiscal year 2025, there are no funds as currently funded in the 5-year plan for any expansion for Greater Arizona. And the current 5-year plan, where you see expansion ongoing inside of MAG and PAG, it's only because of our regional funding. Thus, why to me the RTA is so critical here locally. But as of right now, there's no funds available after 25 for anything other than some modernization and some preservation. So there's, to expand 19 or 10 would probably require an influx of more additional federal dollars. I don't know if it's going to be something that would be viable in this round or not, but on the books with the current outgoing plan after 2025, there is no funding for expansion in the ADOT budget.
And General, that would include expansion of interchanges or fixing of interchanges?
The expand depends what it actually does in the process, but right now the interchange improvements are considered expansion. There are some that you could possibly put under the modernization, but that's really when it's identified as a safety enhancement or improvement specifically. We've looked at all the interstates. We got the briefing from Rod Lane last time about all the interstates or the exchanges going down Interstate 10. And if you go compare that to where the 5-year plan is, there's several of those that are funded in ADOT, but only through the end of 22, 23, and then there's no more. So it's really going to be a funding issue for those expansions. And the question on Sonoran Corridor in a lot of cases is it going to bring increased capacity? We anticipate increased capacity just because of the continued growth of the nation and goods and services and trafficking. There's always been a long push by Arizona to try to enhance the Mariposa port of entry to bring even more trade and traffic from Mexico, improving our economic situation as well. So we're hoping one of the things they're hoping this will do is it will make the flow of those goods being brought up from Mexico.
And that's exactly my point. What I'm trying to get to is that this particular infrastructure investment, the Sonoran Corridor, shouldn't be looked at on its own, correct?
Correct.
It should be looked at what is connecting, why do we need this? And what are the connections that are important that we already have there? I-19 is an important connection to Mexico, which is our #1 trading partner. And when we think about I-19, Sonoran Corridor, and I-10 going east, we really are, as a state, competing with Texas.
Absolutely.
And that's why the Maricopa Port of Entry and its expansion is important, and having custom officials there is important. And so my question is, we have to really look at this as the big picture, and it shouldn't be just focused on the Sonoran Corridor. It should be, what are we doing on I-19? And what are we doing on I-10 headed east? Because I-19 is the connector to Mexico, our #1 trading partner, that could lead to commercial traffic going into California and Nevada. And so for me, it's not just $1 billion project, which is the Sonoran Corridor, but it's also how much does it cost us to invest and expand I-19 and invest and expand into I-10. And so I think looking at the bigger picture is going to really take a lot of coordination and planning. And the big question is, just as Mayor Murphy said, we don't have $1 billion in our pockets, right? So what is it that the state is willing to do to partner with our region to be able to fund this? Because it's not just the region, it's not just the state, it's also connecting with the federal government funds.
And Mayor, you are absolutely correct on those concerns. It's really as much about a continuing addressing the infrastructure and transportation funding at all levels.
All levels.
And as it sits right now, the state knows that because of the priority of preserving the roads we have, unless either the funding from the federal government or the revenue inside the state changes prior to 2025, we're going to be in a position where.
Right.
So it's with all good things in infrastructure, you create one spot that addresses a need, and now you're going to create another spot that has a need that you're going to
Yes.
need to address.
Well,
So
and
you're correct.
I'm so sorry, we're having a conversation over here, but you're all included. For me, I see the needs that Interstate 10 going east has as well, correct? I mean, in order to be able to have a good system of transportation when it comes to our interstate, we all see the needs on Interstate 10 headed east, which is where the growth is happening in Pima County. It's not acceptable to have interchanges on Keno Parkway and I-10 that no longer, I mean, they were built when they were built, and now that was in the 60s, and now we need to make sure that all the way from South 6th Avenue, actually, South 6th Avenue, which is in South Tucson, all the way over to Houghton and Rita Road, we really need to invest in our interstate system and on and off ramps and interchanges there. So I think we need to see some numbers so that we can all help plan for the needs of this area.
Well, the other additional with SR 189 being completed, that's going to add additional flow through, as well as, remember, anything south of El Toro, also I-11 plays into that, because I-19 will be expanded for I-11 / the Sonoran corridor, anything south of Sahuarita. So just takes money and advocacy, I think, to try to keep the focus on Southern Arizona, because without that, stuff just doesn't appear up in Maricopa getting to Vegas. And I think that was some of our success advocating the extension of the designation of I-11 down to Nogales, because all the conversation early was about Phoenix to Vegas. It never was about how you get better from Nogales up there. So you just keep advocating for us over there, General. On there, but I think it's an important point.
Thank you, Chair.
No, any other discussion? Thank you, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you very much.
Next, we move to item number 6. As you know, we've had this conversation since April. I keep looking at my screen because I don't see both of the nations. You know, my opinion, we've had this conversation ongoing. And, you know, we've talked about equity and underserved communities. And I personally don't know of two probably more underserved communities than the two nations. My comfort level would be, since we have a meeting in January, I really want all of us involved in that conversation. So I'd be advocating that we table this, bring back our ideas when both nations can be a part of it, because I'm still looking at the screen and both chairmen are here. And
Yeah,
I think it would be not a good thing not to have them included in the discussion personally.
I completely agree. I think that's a good idea. But I did want to add some comments.
Yep. Is that okay?
Before we continue the item.
Or-
Up to the chair.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
on the
sure.
agenda, so it's up
I
to
like
the chair
talking,
which
so
one.
that's fine.
Alrighty, so I'd like to thank my colleague Supervisor Rex Scott for bringing his proposal for consideration to a table. I think that really opened up the dialogue between all of us. I appreciate his desire to move forward on a conversation that has seemed to be stuck. So you're presenting us your thoughts on weighted or representational voting was very important. I too brought an option that you invited us to present an option. So I brought an option for you all to take and consider, and I'm gonna share this via email with Jackie so she could distribute to all of us. But here it is, if you'd like to take one. Here you go, Mayor. Thank you so much. I want to make sure, you know, and this is presented to you all so that you can consider what the information that we have in front of us. and be able to take a look at our thoughts. I did seek the advice of our city attorney that analyzed both PAG and RTA bylaws and ARSs. And what our city attorney found is that with respect to the board membership, the state statute provides that the RTA board is made up of the members of the regional council of the governments that are from the county that established the authority. In other words, the PAG Regional Council serves as the RTA board. So unlike the RTA board, the composition of the PAG Regional Council is not established or governed by the state statute. Instead, the composition of the PAG Regional Council is established and governed by the PAG bylaws. Amendments to the PAG bylaws do not require any action by the Arizona State Legislature. Instead, PAG bylaw amendments can be approved by the PAG Regional Council. This means that the composition of the PAG Regional Council, and in turn, the composition of the RTA board, could be revised by a majority vote of the Regional Council by amending the bylaws to provide additional Regional Council members to Pima County and the city of Tucson. So I agree. I wanted to make sure that I presented a city of Tucson option for consideration. I want to make sure that I make absolutely clear, as I have been making since April that we brought this conversation up, that equity shouldn't mean taking away from anyone. That equity and consensus building so that we can have this conversation, be able to deliberate and make our decisions as a body, that we should all feel as though we're coming together, and everyone in all of our residents should be fairly represented. So please take the memo with you. I think we have a way to be able to come to a consensus, but most importantly, I want to make sure that we come to a consensus. As you all know, my colleagues on the council were very clear in terms of we need to find solutions because we've been stuck for a long time. And we have a February deadline that, even though it's flexible and movable, I would like to respond to my colleagues too, and at least show that we're moving forward. In the meantime, I know that we do this at the council level. I would like to make sure that we include the work of our executive director for PAG and RTA, which is Mr. Mogimi. I would like Mr. Mogimi to help us in this. So far, I think we've all had this conversation. Supervisor Scott has brought something, I've brought something, we've talked about the CAC. I would like Mr. Mogimi to get involved in this. It's time, and I would expect that as the executive director of the PAG RTA, his duty is to help us find consensus and help us move us forward. So I'm used to, maybe I'm pampered at the mayor and council that our city manager does a lot of work to bring 7 of us together to find compromises and consensus. I would ask that our executive director, Mr. Mogimi, do the same thing and get his hands dirty, get what we have in front of us, and try and get us to consensus as much as we possibly can, so that in the January meeting, he can present to us where we go. So there's a Supervisor Scott proposal, there's the City of Tucson proposal. I would like a PAG executive director proposal so that we can advance this conversation. With that, I would love to be able to get this resolved, move it to the side so that we find a solution, and that we here on this board can focus on the issue at hand of getting ourselves coordinated and on the same page for federal infrastructure funds. Because guess what? That's the big picture. That is the big picture. We need to get ourselves coordinated on the same place and ready to bring federal infrastructure funds to Southern Arizona. So I love the idea of moving this to January. I think our tribal members are an important piece of this conversation.
Right, and then hopefully that'll give us and them some time to review that. And I would say, other proposals might come from other communities that, for instance, we may like the structure as it exists. So that might be some of the feedback that will be given. But I'm just being a little careful because on one hand, we're tabling something, and the other hand, we're having an extended.
If Mr. McGeamey's being directed to do something, and the board really, just given the way things have been, we really need to vote and direct him to do it. If you're going to do that, or if you're leaving it tabled, but I just want to make sure it's clear what staff is supposed to do for the next meeting.
Right.
Alrighty.
And my understanding, we have not tabled the subject yet because we're still talking about it. So we don't have a motion on the floor to table it yet. So I think this discussion that we're having right now is extremely important. And Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I agree. I think the tasking of the executive director getting involved is a good way to try to coordinate some of this effort, because so far we have had meetings where this has been on there on the topic, and we've come in, we've talked, we've debated, and we haven't made any progress. That being said, having my first blush at this memorandum has said, wait, there's another alternative. It's one that I don't think is going to be highly received, but we'll see what individuals think because of the numbers in there. We've got Supervisor Scott's proposal, and I think I know at the last meeting I talked about trying to come up with some other alternatives. I think those could also be presented. What I'm curious about is where we step over the lines of open meeting laws when we start talking about coordinating with the executive director to come up with a plan, because I do believe every member of this council this board is going to have an opinion on what way they want to go. Now, obviously, we can't there's no item right now up for vote. There's nothing yet on the agenda for vote. So I know there's no problems with coordinating that, but what level can we all coordinate, talk about the specific ones that have been proposed, but not on the calendar, they aren't up for a vote yet. And in what manner can we engage with the executive director on trying, because I do agree with the mayor on the side. This is the only topic that's getting all the headlines. And what I think we're missing is we're missing the CAC, we're missing the RTA plan, we're missing the other important stuff to truly keep moving forward with regionality in this region. So I would like at some point for us to address this one way or the other and see, because until then, it's apparent that the city's got some deadlines. We know there's others that say that there's no reason to change any of this and that. There's always the no action alternative for any vote that we put up. So if it fails, that goes back to what's current. But I do think the continued conversation and working with the executive director and amongst the council members, where do we cross the line?
Mr. Chairman, members of the regional council, it's extremely difficult to put that onto staff for that reason. I mean, you're saying hopefully, Mr. McGeamy, go to work, broker a deal, work your magic, but that means he's got to talk. Doesn't he have to talk? I don't know. I mean,
Talk to seven.
he knows how it's done. I'm not, I don't, but
Mr.
you're not
Benavides,
supposed to do that.
Mr. Benavides, I'm sorry. Mr. Mogimi meets with each and every one of the mayors and the people here on this council. He already knows where people stand. And so I'm sorry, but I don't think he would be breaking open meetings law to try and bring an option based on the comments and the information and the concerns that we've all said publicly. What we're asking him is based on what he knows and what he's heard to do his job. And so I for one believe that we either fix this issue or not. And then once, it is my desire to put this issue to the side, resolve it, find a solution, and then hold hands as a region and prepare ourselves for a historic opportunity for our region. So I don't know if we have to give direction, but I think that by January, we need to find solutions for the impasse that we've been in.
You want to do this?
And if I may,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, again, thank you all. This is obviously good conversation. I personally believe the conversation has been fruitful since April. We've had this conversation at every meeting. Obviously, we serve at your pleasure. If you like us to assist, I'll be more than happy to do that. From my perspective, this is a governance issue and it really relies at the council level. And obviously both Mr. Benavides and myself have been trying to provide any questions you have. The legal opinion that Mr. Benavides provided, I think was really clear on what your options are. I'll be more than happy to continue the conversation, answer questions. A recommendation of an option most likely would be along the same lines of what we've been talking about. I don't think we have any magic ideas of how you're all going to reach consensus on something that's been discussed since April. So I don't anticipate that there would be any one solution that's going to get us there. Obviously, we're hopeful, and I honestly believe the conversations have been very fruitful. So you already have all the information. I'll be more than happy to coordinate the information and maybe present it differently. But the legal description we received from Mr. Benavides, I thought that was very helpful and really laid out your options.
I know from my experience with the town, it can't be felt like I use my town manager to go broker a deal behind the scenes and magically we come out at the council meeting with something. And that's only now the staff provides information, they provide, what they think you can get to, but I think we want to follow the open meeting law. If we have a staff member that goes to each one of us, Thomas, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's never the way I was taught down in South Riga.
Well, and Mr. Mayor, the council, it's part of the art of the way these things get done, but they can't be that the exact, if you ask for my opinion, it's one person can't serve as a hub for the public body's conversation. That's it. Other than that, I know that things get brokered and done, but it can't, I'm just telling you, that's the parameters you ask. Otherwise I wouldn't say anything.
General Supervisor Scott and then Mayor.
Sorry, because I'm just wanted a clarification. So I understand that the idea of having the executive director be the one that's trying to broker the deal. But the question I've got really is more related to those of us sitting around the table here. Is there a point where there's nothing on the table yet, there's no plan, but in devising, creating a plan, and I'll relate it to what you and your council do. You and your council members talk on a routine basis, on and off in the public eye when you're
In the public
addressing
eye.
things,
Yes.
but you also meet with them outside of the public eye. And the question is,
Well, not on one issue,
on a single issue or an
Oh.
agenda item. Really cool.
either.
What I don't want to do is find, but what we're doing now is we're putting together pieces of, we have the city's proposal, we have one by Supervisor Scott. I'm betting you're going to hear a couple others that may come forward now. And there's a potential we're going to walk in, we're going to have 5 different plans to consider and vote on. If that's how we have to do it to keep it in the public domain on those conversations, then I just want to know that going into it so I don't make an error. So are you saying that limited conversations between us in between meetings is
Sure, General Maxwell, members of the council, you can talk to one another, but then that one person can't go and say, hey, I talked to General Maxwell and this is the way he feels. What do you think of that? You know what I mean? It's just, that's what the way the laws lay out. It's designed to prevent that.
Yes. Well,
Sure.
wait, let me go.
I'll wait. I'll wait.
Supervisor Scott, Mayor Honey.
Just wanted to make a statement and then also ask Mayor Romero a question, a clarification question. And the statement is, and we talked about this after Mayor and Council set the February 1st deadline. And I said in these chambers, I did not think that that deadline was helpful. And I continue to believe that. But I also said in these chambers, and I heard Mayor Honey say it on the radio just the other day, RTA Next is not going to move forward without the involvement of the city of Tucson. And so I put my compromise proposal forth to try and meet some of the concerns that were raised by the mayor and council of our largest jurisdiction. But I've also been very clear about one difference between my proposal and what Mayor Romero has presented, which is that if you look at the 4 votes for the city of Tucson, the 3 votes for Pima County in my proposal, those are votes, not members. Votes, not members. Even though the column at the bottom says total members, that's a distinction between what I put forth and what the city has put forth. And I also specifically said, and this was along the lines of the legal opinion that we got from Mr. Benavides, one of the reasons I structured my proposal the way that I did is because my understanding was that putting it in that language, votes rather than members, would get us away from the legislative action that might be necessary to change the membership of the RTA board. So that brings me to my clarification question. Your proposal talks about actual members, 8 members, 5 members, or is that votes?
Yes, and that is some of the work that I believe that our city attorney and Mr. Benavides and the work that should be done by Mr. Mogimi is how can we amend the bylaws? Is it representational voting or is it weighted voting? So weighted voting is your 4 votes per jurisdiction. Representational is membership. Okay. And so again, this proposal that I put on the table is for conversation. I understand that it's best to come together and have a compromise, and I'm flexible, Supervisor, okay? I just want to let you know. I wanted to put a proposal on the table so that we could have comparisons and based on percentages of population. So that's why I put this on the table. But I highly believe that both the attorney and Mr. Mogimi really need to get to the nitty-gritty of what can be done. What is it that they have heard on a public setting, and knowing what has been heard on the public setting, present to this board a proposal that will bring us all together. Right now, I believe we need that. I believe we need that. We need that direction from our executive director to be able to put something on the table and help us. As the executive director, I believe his responsibility is to help us bring consensus to the table. And if the sooner we do this, even though I've said before, I'm flexible in terms of the February 1st deadline, but I do have to show my council that there is progress on the issues that we're concerned about. So yes, I'm flexible, and I think that based on the conversations we've had and what the executive director should understand from the conversations that are happening, we do need his assistance to get us to where we need to get.
So just to follow up with that, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry, obviously we're all seeing the mayor's proposal, Mayor Romero's proposal for the first time today, but some of us, including me, had seen Mr. Rankin's legal opinion to mayor and council because it's a matter of public record, and it very much aligns with Mr. Benavides's opinion to us, meaning that if you add members,
not votes, members to the PAG Regional Council, you are adding members to the RTA board. Isn't that correct, Mr. Benavides?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so that was why I made that distinction.
Mhm.
Now, having heard what Mayor Romero said, the basis for my proposal, what has been said by other members around this table dating back to the spring, I certainly think there is a possibility that anybody at this table, including the executive director, could present another proposal to try and bring us forward without making any kind of risk of violating the open meeting law. Everyone's ideas, everyone's positions are abundantly clear. They have been abundantly clear. And the one thing that we cannot fail to do is move forward together. I hope that's something that all of us are in agreement on, and we're getting to crunch time. So anything that causes us to move forward together is exactly what the public is expecting us to do.
In my understanding, and clarify, Thomas, if you would for me, I understand that you could, direct the executive director to say, what's it take to change bylaws? What does it take to do this? What does it take to do that? But I believe we crossed the line on brokering a deal when they have to go behind the scenes, off the record to each one of us. Now, independently, can he say, I've listened to everybody as a staff member, present this and say, oh, this is a alternative, just like other people have done? I would agree with that.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Well, Mayor Winfield, I'm having.
Mayor.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Keep forgetting. You're sitting too close to me. I don't see you as well as you.
You could throw something.
Mayor Honey.
Well, this tabled continued
Yeah,
conversation.
yes, I know. Well,
It's going to take 2 hours.
I would agree.
I will make some comments, and one of them is directed to you, Mayor Romero, and I've known you for a long time. I've talked to my council too about weighted voting or adding people and doing stuff like that. To every one of them, both Republicans and Democrats. And I'm not going to repeat what they said because there are ladies present here. That ain't going to happen with us. That doesn't mean that we don't see some trying to work some things around to make things work better. Right now, I think what's tearing this board apart is the city's ask. And we were doing quite well before. You're getting the lion's share, even bigger than your population of the money, both from PAG and RTA. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think we're spending a whole lot of time here trying to placate you and your council. And I don't hear anybody else around here that has a problem. And I want RTA next to happen. But if it doesn't, I'm going to be fine. And I'm talking about my people in my town. I want it to happen. But what we're doing right now is going to hurt. I mean, the chairman said he's pretty happy with the way it has been. So am I. And I think there are others that agree with that. And if we keep pushing this and we keep coming up with 4s and 3s and everybody else gets 1, I'll quote Chairman Ucapicio, Peter, who's not here, good guy. He said, we fought hard just to get a vote. The tribe and the nation don't collect taxes at all. They do spend money in our communities that contribute. They fought to get a vote. If we start doing weighted voting, we might as well just take their vote away again. And I think we have to look at the things in the big picture. I want this to work, but if it gets too far out there, it's not going to work, at least for my community.
And that's why I tabled it.
No, you need a vote to table it.
I don't think it's appropriate for Mr. Mogimi to broker a deal, so to speak. I do think that Mr. Mogimi could bring forward options, including Supervisor Scott, Mayor Romero. There's the, I suppose, no action option as well. There may be other options that could bring those options forward. You could list the pros and cons as your staff sees it among those options. And then by presenting those options, then we can deliberate about those options and ideally then arrive at a decision. So I think that's where it would be helpful. Look at the options as the staff and then present those at the January meeting. That provides the forum then to have a discussion. And I would hope that an option would be included that no action option. Pros and cons for each of these.
And I agree with that, because that's usually how I work with staff on, give us A, B, and C. A, B, when we did, we had to raise our wastewater rates, we asked for good, better, best, the Sears version, of that. But it was up to the council to decide in public and have that conversation, not to go behind and end up with the medium rate increase. That's where I totally believe that's right. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, first and foremost, what I think an executive director or a city manager's responsibility to do is based on what he hears publicly from their board or their council. As you said, Mayor Winfield, you know what the sentiment is of every member. Your job is to gather all of the information and put it together for us. I believe that's fair. That's a fair request. And the other piece is that for some reason, there's the thought that being fair and equitable and having an equitable voting system takes away from other jurisdictions. On the contrary, if you switch that narrative upside down, being able to be good regional partners, if the Pasco Yaqui tribe ever brings something to Tucson or Pima County and says, I need your vote on this because this is a concern I have, the other jurisdictions, Pima County, the city of Tucson, can lend that support to whatever smaller jurisdiction South Tucson needs. So you are looking at this system of equity and fairness the wrong way. Sahuarita might need, that Sonoran corridor so that you can help grow. You can come to Tucson and Pima County and the Pasco Yaqui and say, we need your vote. That's regional cooperation. It's being fair and equitable doesn't take from anyone else. It is being able to have a system that fairly represents people. As a matter of fact, the MAG is seeing that happen right now. The Gila River and other Native nations, they have a weighted vote. They're going to Phoenix and Tempe and Mesa to ask for their support and their vote to figure out some water issues that are happening in that area. And so I would argue that by being able to have a fair and equitable voting system, you're taking away from anyone. So that narrative is, especially when time and time again, I, as the mayor of Tucson, have said very clearly here that I want things to work. And Mr. Tony, we still have $190 million worth of projects as a city jurisdiction that haven't been accounted for. So in theory, yes, the city of Tucson was receiving its fair share, but in reality, we're about $190 million worth of projects that we don't have an answer for. So I would say, and I would plead for my colleagues on this board that we give direction if someone would consider joining me in giving direction to Mr. Mogimi to bring back in January all of this information, give us our options so that we can have a much better discussion in preparation of what needs to happen. And then in preparation of us moving forward in planning for infrastructure dollars. So I guess I don't have to ask, I'd like to make that in form of a motion that we give direction to Mr. Mogimi to come back and bring, based on the conversations at the table, bring possible alternatives, pros and cons, and solutions to move the conversation forward.
I'll second it for the purpose of further discussion.
General, you were like you wanted to say something before I did.
Well, I'm gonna try to ask for an amendment to it because I'd like if we're gonna propose this, I'd like it to be clear that we're not asking the executive director to broker a deal. But I heard the mayor's motion was to include all the options, a list of pros and cons, including any other options that some of us may propose to the executive director over the course of the next month. And the reason I would support making that as for a point of discussion, obviously, and we know the bylaws say we can take action on any discussion item. So by making a point of discussion, but and I'm supportive of that because I want to see us start talking specifics of what that means, whether it's no action or it's 8. But I also think we need to have more information on, as part of the executive director's thing, on the difference between what weighted voting does to us. And again, it's been broken out very well by Mr. Benavides already, but also because remember, proportional voting changes the membership. It also changes the yes. Right now, the mag weighted voting is only a blocking action. It's really only a veto. There's a huge difference in that. So if we go proportional, especially to some of the numbers we've seen out there, or if we go weighted, and I think we need to have a thorough discussion on that and the other options. And I would be surprised if we were able to get by that January meeting a decision, but I think it will take us a further step. But I would ask for just to clarify the motion that this is not directing a brokering of a deal, but just a gathering of all the proposals and options, their pros and cons from staff's perspective on the pros and cons.
I would accept that clarification, General.
As would I, as the person who seconded the motion.
Any further discussion on that? I'm personally comfortable with you coming up with, which from what you know and hear, and you might hear from others like myself, which might be a proposal that you just gather the information with our attorney. And
Mr. Chair, members of the council, would be more than happy to, and obviously that is our duty to respond to any questions you have and try to help identify pros and cons. I believe that's something that we would do at any time, and any member can ask us for those questions. We'll be happy to do that. My only request is that this would really be more of a legal discussion as well. So I would request to have Mr. Benavides to support that effort as well.
any further discussion? There is.
Mayor Murphy, thank you very much. And I appreciate what you said a minute ago, which is that I certainly hope that not only do we have the kind of compromise proposal perhaps that we've just directed the executive director to try and fashion, but if there are additional proposals from any member, including yourself, including Chairman Yucapizio or Chairman Norris, that just adds to the discussion. And the whole basis for this dialogue since the spring is to get us to a point where, once again, we can all move forward together. And we're not going to do that unless we honor every voice in the room. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Before we move on to the next one.
Yes.
I put together some information that I thought might be useful regarding the Citizens Advisory Committee. I'd just like to pass it out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Would you mind doing that during the RTA meeting, please?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
With all due respect to Mayor Tessel, I would suggest do that RTA meeting.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's what
just,
we're gonna do.
okay. That'd be fine.
Next is the schedule, meeting schedule, Mr. Marini.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, again, as you recall, typically during December meeting, we schedule for the following year. I've had the opportunity to discuss options with both chairs of the PAG and RTA. Their recommendation is in your packet to meet on every other month, with the exception of taking July off as an extra month during the summer period. So in your packet, you have 6 meetings scheduled. The meetings are typically scheduled on the 4th Thursday of those months, with the exception of December because of the holidays. That one is usually earlier in the month. So with that, we request your approval of the schedule. And again, recognizing that if special meetings are requested, we can coordinate those with the chairs and schedule special meetings. If there's a conflict on a meeting date, as long as we know the conflict early on, we'll be more than happy to coordinate with the chair and other members to find an alternative date.
Thank you. Supervisor Scott.
Mr. Chair, as was indicated earlier in the meeting, and I really appreciate this, Mr. Mogimi meets with each one of us individually to go over the agenda prior to any meeting. And when we were talking about this agenda item, he noted that the chief reason for this recommendation is so that our subcommittees can have ample time to meet in between our meetings, which made perfect sense to me. I also will go back to conversations that we had earlier in the year when myself, General Maxwell, Mayor Romero were all saying we need to meet monthly. The main reason that you heard that from us was because we felt the pressure to get the CAC up and running. We're going to have a full CAC by the end of our January meeting. We've also gotten that report from Pocky and her team. So what I would like to do is, based on what you had shared with me, Mr. Mogimi, is I'd like to move to approve the proposed meeting schedule for the PAG Regional Council, provided that a complementary schedule for PAG subcommittees is presented to the PAG Regional Council at the January 27 meeting.
And I would echo, because I found over the years being with PAG RTA, the differential is in-house, we have our own town engineer and you just do things. This is very different on staff's perspective. They have to get with all of our municipalities, whether it's the management committee and technical management committee. And I think that could be very, very difficult doing it on a monthly basis. So I would echo your comments on there.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that, but I feel that we should at least plan to meet monthly the first half of the year in 2022, or we can add a February, April meeting to this particular schedule, because not just the obvious conversation we just had right now, right? That we are still in negotiation in terms of voting structures, but hopefully we get that resolved in February. We also need to get ourselves ready for the federal infrastructure funds that will be available. Some of them are formula funds that we all receive directly, but there are going to be grant funds that, as I said in my State of the City, the president is watching Southern Arizona. They're practically telling us how to go about it and get it. And so I would highly reconsider, Supervisor, that we at least consider a February, April additional meetings so that we we, this board, can continue moving forward in terms of our priorities and what we want to partner in. What is it that we want to ask the state for? What is it that we want to ask the federal government for? So I would highly suggest an additional February, April meetings.
Yes.
Mhm.
I appreciate Mayor Romero's comments. I'm certain we could schedule a special meeting if we needed to. I'm willing to take the advice of the chair of the regional council and the chair of the RTA board. I intend to make a similar motion when we meet as an RTA board, but I think the mayor's comments are well taken, and I'm sure we'll all be open to scheduling special meetings. I do want to see that complementary schedule for subcommittees presented to us at the January meeting, not only so that those subcommittee folks know what their schedule is, but to go with the point that Mayor Romero just made, I would imagine as we're moving forward with dealing with the ramifications of whatever comes from the federal infrastructure bill, that groups like the TMC and the TPC are going to be very much involved with that.
I would agree with that. And what I worry about is if we are meeting so regularly, this doesn't happen by magic. You know, it's a lot of work on staff to make that happen. I'd rather have them working with the subcommittees, working with the federal government or the state or wherever it is, and not putting these together. I'm always open if something is gleaned by, you know, ADOT or anybody else that, hey, we have to get together. But I personally think that's a good foundation, which can be added to if we needed to.
And can I ask, Mr. Mogini, is the schedule that I'm requesting for the subcommittees already
Yes.
being developed?
Yes, sir. It's already developed. The
Okay.
management committee has basically what typically happens. You have your advisory committees, they meet first. They make recommendations to the management committee, and then the management committee makes recommendations to this body. So typically that hierarchy of committee meetings have to happen in that sequence. So if we don't give them that opportunity, we won't have recommendations from those committees for you. But Jackie has the schedules for the management committee, and Dave has the schedule for the TPC, and we'll share that with you shortly.
Thank you very much.
So,
So we have or just to clarify, so we have a motion to accept this. I have a second from Mayor Winfield to accept this.
thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. So would you reconsider or a clarification or an amendment, a friendly amendment to your motion, that if we were to need to meet in February and April, that we start
We would
thinking
call a
about those
special meeting?
possibilities?
That we would call a special meeting?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's.
It's already in the, you know, dates are subject to change and special meetings are scheduled by the chair. So-
okay, this is not a hard one, you guys. This is not hard. Friendly amendment to consider a February and an April meeting if necessary.
Well, I think that's already,
It is.
already implied, isn't it? That was.
I don't want it implied. I wanted deliberate.
But what's your,
So,
so what, just to make sure I'm
Yes.
clear on what you're asking that we set a February and April meeting?
No,
no,
No?
it's asking what we already have in
Okay.
the document. General,
So I understand why the point that the mayor's trying to make on this one, and I do think it's an important message to hear, because I'd like to ask staff a clarification question. Special meetings so far, anytime we've called a special meeting, we've had an entire meeting. I mean, it's been the entire thing. I guess I'm at a loss why we can't have a single topic special meeting, just to come in and talk about either the infrastructure plan, just to inform us as members what we know and what's possible. And same thing on the CAC. My biggest concern, while I do believe that the infrastructure is going to be something, remember, a third of the BIF now that they're calling it, the bipartisan infrastructure funding, the BIF, third of that is competitive grants. And if we're not ready, we're going to lose. That's ultimately how it's going to go. And that includes engagement with our legislator, our congressional delegation and others. So I am worried about that. What I'm really worried about is we won't come out of January with the Citizens Advisory Committee.
yeah,
And so if we don't have a Citizens Advisory Committee in January, I'll probably be asking for a special meeting, at least just on that issue, to try to get it done in February, because we've got a group that's been together for over 3 years. We've been at a stalemate for about 2, and we need to get them moving because eventually 2024, and that's my date, not anybody at this board's date, that's the date we have to have the RTA on the ballot by, is going to come really quickly. And for us to do 200 community outreach meetings to get that, to go through all that process, we got to get going. So my concern of going back, and I'm fine with voting for this as long as we as an organization understand that we may have the need for a special.
Well,
meeting.
in general, every meeting we have, if we come to that January meeting
Agreed.
and there's a bad dot, whatever, and we can at that point, that day, say, you know, it's gone off the rails a little, we need a February meeting. We always have the ability
Mr.
to.
Chair, may I just respond to the question? So great question. Thank you. If you recall, Chairman Yagapisi mentioned that previously, that if we have just one issue, that's typically a study session, and we'll be more than happy to schedule a study
Okay.
session on just that one issue.
And we can take action at study
Of course,
sessions?
yeah, if it's
Okay.
agenda.
Then I'm
yes.
good with that.
So hearing that dialogue is indeed helpful, and I certainly would consider what the mayor is proposing to be a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Can you, well, first clarify that we're gonna hold this, we're gonna hold a special meeting if needed?
So, yeah, the motion would be move to approve the proposed meeting schedule for the PAG Regional Council, provided that a complementary schedule for PAG and RTA PAG subcommittees is presented to the PAG Regional Council at the January 27 meeting, with the proviso that it may be necessary to schedule a special meeting in both or either February and April. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. To me, it did.
All right, good.
The second is fine with that. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
We adjourned.
Thank you.
They need a break in them?
I don't.
We're keeping good time. Yeah, we're keeping good time.
Okay. So I call to order the meeting. And do we have a call to the audience?
Yes, sir. If you don't mind, let's do a roll call first, and then we'll go into a call to the audience.
Okay.
Mayor Ed Honey,
Here.
Mayor Tom Murphy,
Here.
Mayor Joe Winfield,
Here.
Mayor Bob Tissell,
Here.
Mayor Regina Romero,
Here.
Supervisor Rex Scott,
Here.
and Mr. Ted Maxwell.
Here.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we do have several people on the phone line, and we also have former Mayor Supervisor Dan Ekstrom in person. So if you don't mind, we can start with former Supervisor Ekstrom first.
Okay. And
Mr. Chairman, members of the RTA board, this was quite an enjoyment being here. For those of you that don't know, I was actually on the regional council beginning in 1973 during my term in South Tucson, going all the way during my time on the Pima County Board of Supervisors. I don't know if it was 19 or 20 years, but it's close to that. I asked somebody to research that for me because I wanted to see if there was a bonus, but I never learned, so apparently there's no bonus. I'm here and I'm glad I was here to hear your meeting. I also have the record for the quickest meeting. We used to meet at the hotel down here on Broadway. We had one meeting where I was the chairman. I was chairman 5 times of the PAG Regional Council. And then I guess I can't take credit for my daughter being here when she was the mayor of South Tucson, but it's a family thing. And just by luck, this morning, I had my annual physical right across the street over here at El Rio on Broadway. And when I heard that this meeting was going on, I said, you know, there's got to be some things that I can give to you that old timers like me, okay, we call them viejitos down in my barrio, okay, but I've been following all that's been going on, and I'm glad to hear that you guys are looking at the importance of the next election for the RTA. I don't know how many of you remember, but in 2006, there was the election schedule for the RTA. And then in January of 2006, the Board of Supervisors, contrary to what some of the business people cared about, scheduled an election in May, the same day, on 2 psychiatric facilities at Keno Hospital, a total of $54 million. And I got to tell you, one of, I don't know, General, if you were around in that time or not, but Jim Click called me. He says, "You're crazy. You're gonna." I said, "Mr. Click, I know politics. You know how to sell cars. And we need you to sell cars because we need better transportation routes." So sure enough, what happened was the fact that people were concerned about it, we actually decided, and it worked. And how do I know? I was hired by the Community Partnership of Southern Arizona and University Physicians Hospital to actually run the campaign for the psychiatric units. We then were sitting back and saying, our surveys were telling us that a lot of our people, because we asked them about the highway, the RTA, and they didn't really know about it. So we started telling them, in order for you to get to Keno, you're going to have good transportation routes. So contrary to a couple of people, we decided to team up. Were any of you at the TCC when all of us met together? Were you there? Okay. I mean, you got people like Brian Flagg standing next to Jim Click. Okay. And that's the reason I'm here. I also had the last general obligation bond in 2014 that I actually ran for Pets Are Worth Saving. I directed that campaign. So I know a little bit about it, not to mention the 32 years that I was in public office. So I'm here to say to you, I know that you had a process to get your CAC. I know that you have 22 members now, and you've got a total of 35. And I know you've had an application process. One of the things that I learned, and I know PAG is really good about trying to affirm their support of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, but we now have the whole issue of diversity and equity, which is one that's more prevalent now. And I think it would be a great idea. And I don't know, I haven't looked at your bylaws or any of that stuff. And the reason this came up is I'm on the Pima County Transportation Advisory Committee. And you've got Tom McGovern, who is on your CAC, and then you have John Bernal, who is a ex officio member. They give reports. So all of a sudden I started waking up a little bit. So what I would like to suggest is that you really look at the whole matter of equity and diversity in terms of trying to put this together. It's not too soon. Now, somebody said, well, are you going to have a script when you go there? No, nobody scripted Dan Ekstrom. But and there's no conflicts. Mayor Honey, I used to do his grandmother's yard work, I know the parents, her late father and her mom of the mayor. And, I can go around. Actually, Bob Tesso lives a couple of houses down from me. And he and I haven't discussed this. But I thought that since I was here, I took Uber over here, okay? And now I said, you know what? If I go to the PAG RTA meeting, I can probably find somebody that's going back to South Tucson to give me a ride. So I see Veronica and Mayor Tesso, so that's what I'm going to do. But the point that I want to make is simply this. We found that diversity and working with people, particularly those of marginalized communities of color, it's important. Because when we put that thing together, I think it failed, I think 5 times. And it happened. And so I think it's something that you've got an old guy like me, a retired but recovering politician. But I think it's important that we find a way. I know that you've had the application process, but how can we build on that? Because we have a lot of time. When we did this, we had only from January to May. Can you imagine if we start working on it now? And I'm willing to offer myself with whatever I know or whatever I don't know to do something like that. And I must say, I'm here representing myself today. I'm not representing anybody else. And nobody has told me to come here. I just did it myself. And I wish that I would have come sooner, but I think now I made the mistake of walking across, and I didn't know that I had to get permission of a day in advance for call to the audience. But I thank you for allowing me to speak up. And I would hope that we could maybe, I'd be happy to work with whomever to try to build on that issue, because I think I want to see my grandkids have good transportation routes here in Pima County. And I thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dan.
So, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, we do have individuals on the phone line, and Nathan will take care of the traffic control for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, caller. You are now live with the PAG Regional Council. Please start your comment by stating your name for the record. After that, you will have 3 minutes to address the RTA board. At the 2-minute mark, I will politely cut in and inform you that you have 1 minute remaining. At the 3-minute mark, I will ask you to conclude your remarks. You may now proceed with your comment.
My name is Ruth Wyman. I am the City of Tucson representative on the Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation Committee, or CART. I attended my first meeting last month, which was only the second CART meeting of
Mr.
2021.
Just a
The
point of
meeting
order.
ended abruptly due to the departure of committee
A little
members.
hard to hear. It's
Turn it
kind
up
of
its line,
muffled.
it'll go.
Are you hearing me?
Not well.
Hello?
We can hear you, but not very well.
Okay, let me take it off. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, can I start over?
Yes.
Okay, all right. My name is Ruth Ryman. I am the City of Tucson representative on the Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation Committee, or CART. I attended my first meeting last month, which was only the second CART meeting in 2021. The meeting ended abruptly due to the departure of committee members. This committee seems to have difficulty getting a quorum for just 2 meetings a year. Going into the meeting, I was curious as to how a new CART subcommittee, the Project Scope and Funding Subcommittee, was formed in August and how the members were selected. According to the RTA Administrative Code, only the full CART can create subcommittees. I was told by RTA staff that the chairwoman requested the formation of the subcommittee. However, the 5 subcommittee members seemed to be in the dark as to why they were there and what they were supposed to be doing. Subcommittee members asked the executive director over and over again, not the chairwoman, what do you want from us? With regards to the chair having the authority to create committees, I learned after the meeting that bylaws created by the CART gives the chair a lot of discretion to take actions unilaterally or at the direction of the executive director of the RTA. These bylaws were not given to me as a new member and are hidden amongst meeting materials on the website. I believe the creation and content of the CART bylaws are problematic and should be revised immediately. The CART bylaws were adopted in 2013 by the CART members without the approval of the RTA board. The CAC bylaws were approved by the RTA board and are easily found on the RTA website. There are items in the bylaws that are in conflict with the RTA Administrative Code. And finally, the RTA executive director provides direction and assignments for the CART chair. Given the authority assigned to the chair in the bylaws, the chair should not be influenced by RTA staff.
1 minute.
The CART is The CART is a citizens committee with the mission of providing oversight of the RTA, which should include the RTA staff, the implementers of the program. How is it permissible for an oversight committee to take direction from those they are overseeing? Was a CART subcommittee created to circumvent the normal committee review process and provide cover for the actions of the RTA staff? How is the only source of information for an oversight committee coming from the staff they are overseeing? And finally, why is this committee not sharing key information on its website for public viewing and input? I firmly believe that the CART membership needs to be engaged, and the oversight role of the CART must be totally transparent, accessible by the public, and independent of staff influence to ensure the public's trust in the process and the RTA expenditures and programming deliver the plan and meet the public's expectations. RTA Next is dependent upon it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. You are now live with the RTA board. Please start your comment by stating your name for the record. After that, you will have 3 minutes to address the RTA board. At the 2-minute mark, I will politely cut in and inform you that you have 1 minute remaining. At the 3-minute mark, I will ask you to conclude your remarks. You may now proceed with your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Colby Henley, and I'm currently one of the co-chairs of the Tucson Complete Streets Coordinating Council. I'm speaking regarding the First Avenue project scope change that is on the agenda today. So just wanted to let you know that we as a body reviewed this project extensively. We reviewed all of the data on performance, looked at all of the public input that was received, and we unanimously voted to support the 4-lane option that is being presented. Our belief is that all thoroughfares, primarily urban thoroughfares like this, that functionality for those type of roads is more than just automobile capacity, but it's about improving mobility and the safety for all modes and all users. And the design that's before you, the 4-lane option, we believe best meets the goals that the city of Tucson has for transportation using the complete streets model. So just ask that you support the First Avenue project scope change before you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, caller. You are now live with the RTA board. Please start your comment by stating your name for the record. After that, you will have 3 minutes to address the RTA board. At the 2-minute mark, I will politely cut in and inform you that you have 1 minute remaining. At the 3-minute mark, I will ask you to conclude your remarks. You may now proceed with your comment.
My name is Jane Evans. Good afternoon, members of the RTA board. As I said, my name is Jane Evans and I live at 2945 North Fontana. Thank you for allowing me time to speak to you today. As the neighborhood spokesperson for the Keeling Neighborhood Association, which is bounded by First Avenue on the east, Stone Avenue on the west, Fort Lowell on the north, and Grant on the south, I've lived here for 32 years and have owned my own business located on Stone Avenue for 43 years. I worked closely with the Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility during the outreach phases that took place both for the development of the Move Tucson Mobility Master Plan and for the needs assessment and analysis for the First Avenue changes in project scope on your agenda today. The extensive outreach and analysis conducted by the city to recommend a 4-lane modernization project that prioritizes pedestrian and bicycle safety and mobility is greatly needed and is in alignment with the city's complete streets policy, which I worked on also. I urge you to support this scope change today. Every day I observe people struggle to get where they need to go on First Avenue. People on bicycles who can't move quickly enough to cross in gaps of traffic, or who don't have the hawk light at Blackledge that has long been promised. People trying to reach transit stops that aren't located with convenient or safe crossings. The only users of First Avenue for whom the road functions are people in cars. But even then, there has been an increase in serious crashes for people driving. In your packet materials for today regarding Tucson's request for the First Avenue scope change, there's a reference to a 2005 RTA board policy that warrants functionality not to be diminished. The Technical Management Committee, as well as the Citizens Advisory Committee, had specific capacity and/or performance improvements in mind when recommending highway improvement projects as well as transit improvements. This functionality should not and cannot be diminished. What's the definition of functionality? I've looked all over the RTA and PAG websites, but I couldn't seem to find a definition for functionality. The Oxford language definitions of functionality include the quality of being suited to serve a purpose well, practicality, the purpose that sometimes is designed or expected to fulfill. Are capacity improvements considered functionality? In the case of First Avenue, all traffic studies and growth projections from your own staff at Pima Association of Governments don't support the need for additional lanes to handle current or future traffic. Are we still, in 2021, in the middle of a worsening pedestrian safety crisis, saying we must add travel lanes when we know we don't need them? How's that an example of good fiduciary duty? Building something we don't need just because we said we would? In the last 10 years, we've lost so many parents, brothers, sisters, daughters, and sons on First Avenue to traffic crashes. I doubt anyone in 2005 or today would describe First Avenue now as having good functionality. Let's not make this difficult to do. Let's not make this difficult to do the right thing. Please support the City of Tucson's plan to modernize First Avenue and increase its functionality for people. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chair. At this time, we have no more callers in the queue.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 3 is the approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I would like to bring up an issue and before we vote on that, but I think I've kind of had issues with consent agenda for a long time, just in terms of things that kind of go by the wayside and you don't get to take a look at. And I know that, well, I worked at Pima College for a number of years, and they had a consent agenda there, and we had some real bad problems there for several years. But in any case, I think that things like meeting minutes and such, should probably be verbatim. That's my feeling anyway, in terms of some of these summarized minutes. And they should be like in a PDF file, verbatim written, so that you can search information on there that you may be interested in revisiting the minutes of a meeting. So much just disappears when you have just a summary type of a project. So in any case, I would like to bring that up as to maybe something that maybe we can change or go over in the next meeting or something like that. So provide that as an agenda item to discuss. Also, one issue that I think that's hit pretty hard, and I'm bringing this up now because I mean it's going to be the end of my term, and it's good time as any, right? So I know we had a project that was in a consent agenda. It was a couple of years ago when Mayor Romero started out, and she asked that it be pulled out of the consent agenda and for further review. And it involved a project that involved broadband, and it was called something the Magellan Advisors Report, and it was taken out of the agenda, but we never went over it or heard anything about it again. I'd just like to get it put back on the agenda and have copies of that distributed to the councils or to the board so that we can review it for the next agenda as well. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else regarding the consent agenda or approval. So if anybody has any other questions, no?
Mr. Chair, My question to you would be, would you want additional, because we had talked about the meeting minutes before in terms of more detail be put in there. Would you want to add some more, because you talked about verbatim? How would you like to see some more meeting, more of the details on the meetings? And then have access and availability to the recording for the public?
Right,
What
yeah.
would you like to see there?
I'm really, in terms of the minutes, I'm just asking for them to be verbatim, you know, and obviously, you know, I have a difficult time for whatever reason with our PAG regional website. And in finding things in there, to me, it seems very, very difficult to find the minutes and things. I know Mr. Morgini will always ask, you know, if I have a question or something like that. I mean, he asks
Mr.
Jackie to
Chairman?
send it out.
If I could, as a point of order, and Mr. Benavides can interact, I think this is out of order. If we're going to talk about changing the way minutes are presented or the way the consent agenda, needs to be an agendized item that we're all here prepared. And I think this discussion right now is out of order, sir, with all due respect.
Okay, well, I kind of tend to agree with that we can just bring it up to the next, onto it as an agenda item.
You're the chairman, put it on the agenda.
We'll do that. So anyway, I guess maybe go to roll call, I mean, on that, and
I don't recall if we had a motion.
I'll make a motion.
There was a motion.
Yeah,
There was
we
a
have a
motion and a
second.
second.
And nothing else on that. So in terms of the motion to approve, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
And then just on that meeting minutes as well, I do notice that October 29th meeting minutes, the call to the audience, they do include the name of the speaker, but they do not include the subject that that speaker is talking about. That's an easy add. You know, we can add it to agenda, but since we're talking about meeting minutes, I think it would be appropriate to add what that individual that is speaking at call to the audience is talk to us about in the meeting minutes, but we'll save that for later.
Mr. Chair, I just want to say, I do appreciate these were expanded. The effort was there. I think what's important, if we add this on the agenda item in the future that we need to talk about is, you know, verbatim, and the ADOT board meetings are verbatim. And it does take a lot of time, and even then it's very difficult to capture every word. So I think it's something that when we add that, we need to get the details on what the workload is going to be put on staff and really what our intention is. But I do believe, as Maroney said, that's a great topic for the next meeting. And Mr. Chair, you've got control of that. So.
Yeah, thank you. So moving on to item number 4 is the RTA board meeting schedule.
Sure.
Scott?
Similar to the motion that I made during the regional council meeting, I would move to approve the proposed meeting schedule for the RTA board, provided that a complementary schedule for RTA subcommittees is presented to the RTA board at the January 27th meeting, and that we include the proviso that it may be necessary to schedule a special meeting in either or both February and April.
Second.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just real quick, one clarification probably from staff on this one. If we were to schedule a special RTA board meeting, do we have to have a PAG board meeting?
We do not. That's definitely, again, if it's a specific topic, study session, that's completely up to the chair.
That's great to know.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item number 5 is the RTA next framework and plan development process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. I'm going to give you a brief overview of where we are with the development of the RTA next plan. I know as the CAC, the committee that's working to select additional members are working through that. I thought it would be useful to bring forward the framework requirements again and let you know where we are and how the current plan, or at least how the current framework relates to our existing policies and statute. In terms of the RTA, as you know, it's a subdivision of the state. It's a taxing subdivision. We are authorized under statute to provide a 20-year transportation plan, and we can seek a countywide sales tax of up to 1 cent. Currently, we're at a half. Recent legislation a couple of years ago enabled us to go beyond that. Both the plan and the tax initiatives require separate voter approval. They would be an item A and item B. In terms of the statutory duties of the RTA board, set priorities of the plan, which is administering and facilitating the distribution of monies for the Regional Transportation Fund. You have sole authority to implement the plans, the RTA board does. And that includes the ability to contract for, absorb, or acquire existing public transportation systems as deemed necessary. And we, in fact, have done that with some of our services today. Elements of the plan have to include a description of each project, along with a schedule of the expenditures and sources of the funding. And the RTA board members are obligated to take an oath of office to discharge their duties. Other statutory components, RTA plan needs to describe each transportation element, including the percentage of the RTA, the percentage of the total RTA estimated tax revenues that will be applied to that, and a dollar amount estimate of how much that excise tax would be. The identified projects within each element have to have a scope of the project and an estimated start date for construction, as well as the dollar amount of the RTA funding. So all of those have to be stipulated to in the plan that's presented to the voters. The Regional Transportation Fund should be or shall be spent on the design, right-of-way purchase, construction, operation, maintenance, and contiguous open space preservation purchase within the voter-approved expenditure limits for each element of the Regional Transportation Plan.
Jim?
Yeah.
Sure. When it said RTA funding, sorry, how it read, that's based on what the voters approved, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The Regional Transportation Plan may not be amended to add or delete an element or substantially change an element without prior approval of the electorate. These are all in the statutes. Prior approval of the electorate is waived if the political subdivision causing the changes within its jurisdiction to the Regional Transportation Plan incurs the additional cost of implementing those proposed changes. And upon construction and completion of that construction, the municipality within which the RTA monies are spent for the project is responsible from that point forward to maintain the project once it's built. The plan, other components of the guiding statutes have us identifying corridors or named projects, and to define the transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor. We determine environmental, economic, energy, and social policies to guide the transportation investment decisions. Determine the impact of the plan on air quality. We have to do an air quality assessment of it with a goal to improve air quality. We give priority to multimodal operations and improvements along high density corridors in order the priority of them in the Regional Transportation Plan development. And it's to the board and the process to determine the mix of alternative transportation modes appropriate for development, consistent with the transportation goals and needs of each corridor, and use appropriate
transportation technologies. And that includes, the variety of elements that we see in our complete street corridors, which would include sidewalks and potentially other forms of transit, as well as park and ride lots, bicycle facilities, and other reasonable facilities to deliver that mix of modes, service to the mix of modes. The RTA's accountability pledge was done by the board. RTA has the legal authority and fiduciary responsibility for the RTA planning sales tax. The regionally adopted strategies, we have regionally adopted strategies for our constituencies and for uniform mitigation. We have allocation of ballot funding to each project. One of the things that the commitment also made was a commitment to public corridor planning processes, which were inconsistent across the region prior to the 2006 plan adoption. And we established the oversight committee, the Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation Committee that I might add, one of the, our larger partners to the north don't have that yet. We had established it, and that's something that was identified in the performance audit in 2017. Continuing on, this is this is what was presented to the voters. We presented in our mobility document every year. It's when we put this out, it's the same material that was presented to the voters in the plan back in 2006. We make that a part of our continuing documentation, and we have an administrative code that compares or matches up with that, which details the budget and scope of work for each project. We also, within our administrative code, give some direction on the safety and environmental and economic vitality elements, which are categorical elements. We don't have specific named projects, but we go through a process to identify projects that are consistent with those goals. And we did that on an annual basis until we hit the period where we started focusing our funding on the RTA plan elements because of the revenue concerns. In terms of future plan components, we'll have to identify elements and the funding percentages that we want to put on those elements. It's up to the board to determine what those are in the process with the CAC. We are and have been continuing to do updated revenue projections and use that as a target. How much of that, whether you choose to employ a baseline or a conservative or a pessimistic forecast in terms of setting it and then leaving yourself some options, that's up to the board. The plan projects need to correspond to measurable goals, and that's something that is continuing to be talked about on a national level. We're looking at goal setting and performance measures, and that we will be looked at against our projects and the delivery over time. And ultimately, the mix of projects in the future plan needs to broadly appeal to the majority of likely voters. So that's pretty obvious, I think. In terms of where we are today, I know we've been talking, there are a lot of people that have suggested that we've committed to certain plan elements. We have not. The plan is still blank. We are at a point where we have a framework, and there are no projects that have been prioritized for inclusion at this point in time. We are at framework only, and this is our blank slate of projects. They don't say whether, I mean, in element A, it's named projects. It's not roadway projects. It's named projects, and then we have categoricals, which is a logical way for us to address meeting the needs of projects, small projects that will be coming up over time. We will have to have transit in there, though. That's mandated by the statutes. Transportation goals.
I'm sorry, Chair. Is a percentage of that mandated or just that it's a category?
It is a category. We have to address it.
Okay.
In terms of where we are with our framework has been approved as a draft. It hasn't been approved as a final, it's been approved as a draft. But where that framework is, we've got it as a framework that addresses certain goals. And what I wanted to do is just relate to how this addresses the statutes that we have to work within. So under transportation goals, we have reducing congestion and providing efficient cross-town mobility. Those directly relate to the state statutes that pertain to identifying corridors and defining transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor. We have a transportation goal of improving transit ridership. Statutes permit the RTA to contract for and absorb, acquire. We have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we meet that with respect to the RTA plan statutes, and including operating the system as the RTA. And it gives priority to multimodal transportation operations and improvements along high-density corridors. Transportation goals of reducing crashes at intersections and reducing wildlife-related crashes relate to the statutes that call for us to identify corridors and define transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor, and as well as determine the environmental, economic, energy, and social policies to guide transportation investment decisions. Transportation goal of improving the conditions of existing roadways. Again, goes to that identifying the needs of, and goals for each corridor. And it also calls for us to determine the need for landscape buffers, noise barriers, pedestrian bypasses, multi-use paths, and other environmental measures relating to the regional transportation plan. Transportation goal that has been put out there is to provide safer bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Statutes permit the RTA to determine the need for, again, what I just read to you about the need for those additional features, making those roads more comprehensive and multimodal, as well as determining the mix of transportational modes appropriate for each development, consistent with the transportation goals and needs for each corridor. In terms of transportation goal of maintaining or improving air quality, again, that directly relates to one of the statutory directives. Improving access to workplaces was identified by the CAC, and the statutes permit us, again, to identify corridors to define those transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor, and the environmental, economic, energy, and social policies to guide our transportation investment decisions. And in support of this, we have the RTA's administrative code and policies. We did one in 2006. Depending upon what we choose to do with this new plan, we'll have to amend it and make it conform with that. And and it will, within the administrative code, define the scopes of the projects that we name, as well as give us guidance on how to add new projects, elements, and so forth under the categorical elements. And with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chair, just a minor correction. The framework was adopted by the CAC. They had a draft early on, and then they finally adopted the framework back in January of 2020.
Any questions?
No, I don't have any questions on this presentation, but it was I that requested a presentation on behalf of the city of Tucson. And even though the CAC did adopt the framework back in January of 2020, the CAC hopefully soon will be changed and new members will be added. And so we believe in the city of Tucson believe that we have a very similar framework that we're using with our Move Tucson plan that we have adopted. Actually, Tuesday, the mayor and council adopted the Move Tucson plan at the regular session. And we want to make sure that some of the framework and input that Move Tucson framework has is also discussed and included within the RTA framework. Since we are adding additional members to the CAC, I think it would be responsible to make sure that the conversation about the RTA framework continue to move until we get to where we need to get. And I think the public is also an important piece of creating that framework if we're going to move forward with a successful RTA next. So we have the Department of Transportation and Mobility put together some slides. I don't know if you received them.
Yes, we have
I'd
them
like
loaded,
to-
and I was just gonna introduce Patrick, but if you don't mind, you can do that.
Absolutely. I'd like to introduce, I think it was Diana
Patrick
or
Hartley.
Patrick.
Patrick Hartley.
Patrick, yes. Thank you so much for being here. I didn't even see you, Patrick. I'm so sorry.
On the podium all afternoon.
Who's here from our Department of Transportation and Mobility to just a couple of slides for you all to hear the framework. Go ahead, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA Board. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present on what I consider a great success in getting Move Tucson adopted at Mayor and Council Tuesday of this week. So thank you very much to our mayor and our council for their support. After 2 years of development, really listening to the community and engaging with residents of Tucson and what kind of those evolving priorities are for the city of Tucson's transportation system. And this is really the first opportunity we've had to kind of look comprehensively at our own transportation system, developing our own long-range transportation plan, focusing on kind of the evolving needs, as I mentioned, in the city, and thinking about it in that more urban context as our community continues to grow and evolve. So what we heard from that, and we heard about from 6,000 residents over about a year and a half, making sure that all materials will develop in English and Spanish, doubling our efforts to really focus on areas of the community where we tend to have lower levels of participation because there are those higher barriers to, being involved in these kind of long-range planning practices. So we feel like what we heard from the community is very reflective of the residents of the city of Tucson, even though we didn't at any time conduct, kind of a random sample survey. So what we presented to council and kind of been carrying forward with the plan was the focus of the Move Tucson process, which was improving safety for all modes across the city. A really big focus on investing in the infrastructure that we already have. We heard that loud and clear from the communities that we have a lot of capacity, and the data certainly supports that. It's that we need to be taking care of our assets. We let our roadways deteriorate over the years, and now is the time to really focus on that. Providing more options for the traveling public, where people feel like we've really developed it into an auto-centric community, and now we need to be thinking about providing those mobility options for people who choose to travel by alternative modes or have no other options. Thinking about heat resilience as we begin to confront the emerging climate emergency. Overlapping with the goals of the RTA plan, providing options for crosstown mobility, and then improved reliability of our transit service. So we translated this then as kind of those big picture goals, or what we heard from the community, into some categories for funding and implementation of Move Tucson. And this in many ways does mirror the way that the RTA plan has been structured. So we've identified named corridor projects in preparation for kind of engagement with the RTA, which are corridors that have a defined location on the network, Speedway from Elvernon to Wilmot or what have you, and a description of what that improvement would entail. So we've been what we're calling network improvements that are location specific. The RTA has been calling them named project. Same concept. We've identified about 260 projects within the city of Tucson. Big one was pavement maintenance and repair, safety specific projects and programs, public transportation service improvements, sidewalk and pedestrian accessibility improvements, traffic signal technology upgrades, and neighborhood scale improvements. And to some degree, many of these do overlap with some of the existing categories of RTA. Some of them are new. And every item past item 1 on this list is treated kind of categorically. So instead of identifying every curb ramp in the city of Tucson, every local improvement, we've identified a financial need for those categories in addition to the named projects. So the effort told us that we have about $13 billion in transportation needs in the city of Tucson. We're looking over a 20-year horizon, and we fully don't anticipate that the Move Tucson plan that we're going to be able to pay for all of that in 20 years, but it does give a sense of the magnitude of need and where those needs are, and helps us kind of frame solutions and implementation strategies for addressing them, looking at all funding opportunities to advance this plan and move it forward. So as I mentioned, about 260 projects totaling about $5.7 billion, some of which we've already submitted then to the RTA in request for that $600 million for 15 years of projects as part of the RTA development process. We've also identified $1.5 billion in systemic needs for our pavement. That includes both locals and majors. Neighborhood street improvement, safety projects and programs, $100 million. We've got a $950 million need on sidewalk gaps and ADA improvements. 85 million on traffic signal technology upgrades, which can really improve the efficiency of the network and facilitate that crosstown mobility. And then about $4.6 billion in public transportation service improvements, which would be the price tag of implementing the PAG City of Tucson Long Range Regional Transit Plan. So as I mentioned, we submitted our named corridor projects to the RTA. In addition, we did attach the framework proposal that we've kind of been talking about, which are those different categories of needs that the community told us through the Move Tucson and really what the data has supported. So again, it's that pavement need, the safety projects and programs, public transportation service improvements, bicycle pedestrian infrastructure, and traffic signal technology upgrades, really seeing what we can get out of, what efficiencies we can get out of our signal network. You will notice that we intentionally left those neighborhood scale improvements off of this element, recognizing that that is more of a city of Tucson focus and something that we intend to take on our own. So that's a bit of an overview of Move Tucson. I can take any questions, but I'd be happy to turn it back over to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate it. I would like to submit this framework that the city of Tucson put together for consideration for the CAC to take a look at. So that as they move and change their framework, when the new members are included in the CAC, that they could have this complete information for them to at least consider.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say Supervisor Scott also wanted to present a proposal as well, I assume, but we did send it out to everyone. I'm not sure if you wanted to present or just the document itself is sufficient.
Thank you, Mr. Mogimi. And I did send a document that I put together in partnership with members of county staff that also addresses, as the mayor's documents do and Patrick's presentation, all of the different issues that we want the CAC to be looking at moving forward. And I also asked Jackie, who obviously never stops working, to send that document to Mr. McGovern and also to Ms. Campbell and Ms. Veras, the chair and co-chairs of the CAC. Because what we've been talking about, and it predates my time on the Board of Supervisors, is demand management strategies for dealing with some of the traffic and congestion issues around our region. And there's a hyperlink in that document that I sent you that will take you to a memorandum that Mr. Huckleberry sent to the Board of Supervisors back in September that talks about some of the work that's been going on in the county for many years. I just want to draw your attention to the fourth paragraph of the document that I sent you under the section that says background. And if you look at the second sentence, it says, however, the principal problem with the current RTA Next effort is that both feeder jurisdictions and the CAC are not being provided with educational information demonstrating the relative benefit cost of all available options to resolve mobility impediments and improve quality of life. The consequence of this lack of information is that the majority of process participants revert back to thinking of the two traditional mobility strategies that drive programs: roadway expansion and transit. And if you go further in the document, down to the summary, what we're suggesting is that, this is in the first paragraph of the summary, in order to advance RTA Next in a manner most conducive to modernization, and we are talking about the time from 2026 to 2046, and achieving the greatest return on investment, it could be proposed that the CAC reevaluate the selection process, as the current iteration has not provided a framework to determine impediments and options to resolve these prior to soliciting solution proposals. Instead, an amended framework could be proposed reflecting the above outlined process in the document and determining community value elements to return on investment calculations. And then we have three possible next steps that we would ask the CAC to consider. Provide the CAC with sufficient education to achieve a full understanding of demand versus supply options. And the county has a lot of resources that we can share, along with some of the work that we've been doing with the University of Arizona. Provide the CAC with tools to evaluate return on investment related to selecting strategies among various alternatives, and ask the CAC to evaluate and rank mobility priorities, consider various strategies for meeting these priorities, and then have each evaluated as to return on investment prior to making final selections. So I was pleased to go after the presentation from the city of Tucson, because I think there are some elements in what Pima County is suggesting that align with what the city is suggesting as well. And I did have a specific question for Mr. Mogimi, and I can put this in the form of a motion, Mr. Chair, if that's more appropriate. But can the staff get back to us with an orientation plan for the newly established CAC, so that they can get a comprehensive understanding of the challenges and innovative strategies being used in regional transportation plans, both locally and nationally?
Yes, so Mr. Chair, Supervisor Scott, if you recall at the last meeting, we had the conversation that once the new members are on board, we would spend a good amount of time to bring them up to speed. And since that's not a quorum of a committee, we can do that. We can have multiple meetings with those individuals, share all the information we have up to date, provide an opportunity for the educational opportunity, and bring them up to speed. And then from that point on, then obviously with the entire committee, we'll continue doing the same thing as well. Going back to a couple of the comments that were made earlier, if I may, so the TMC plays a huge role in this as well. The Technical Management Committee will focus on the technical side of it, and they would provide opportunities to educate these individuals as well.
And then thank you for that. And then a follow-up question I had is, we've been engaging as a PAG Regional Council and an RTA board in a lot of purposeful dialogue about what we need to move forward. Once the 13 new members join the 22 members who've been working since 2018, what is staff going to be doing to facilitate dialogue amongst them so that they can communicate to us what additional resources they may need, both as they're evaluating the framework that was adopted in January 2020 to see if it needs to be revised or augmented, and more significantly, to help them to develop a holistic RTA Next plan?
Sure, be happy to touch on that as well. If you recall, the way it's laid out is really a committee back and forth between Technical Management Committee and CAC. They have liaisons that serve on both committees. So they have an open communication between the two committees. They can ask for information, get information back and forth. And then by the same structure, the chairs of both committees can also feed up to the RTA board request for additional direction or information and receive that direction back to individual committees. So it's really a triangle and open communication constantly. And as staff, obviously, that's our responsibility to make sure that if they need direction from the board, we'll come back to the board with a specific question for CAC would like a direction on X, Y, and Z. And then at that point, we'll be able to take that back to the CAC. Same thing with the TMC. TMC is going to require a lot of back and forth between the CAC as well as the board to get direction on any issues that they need to provide support to the CAC. So TMC is really more of a resource to the CAC as well.
And thank you for that. And I know that Mr. DeBonis has been filling in on the TMC in the absence of Mr. Huckleberry. I'm certain that both that he, Dr. Cowam, Ms. Oliveras, Ms. Skinner, all of them are going to be tremendous resources as we're trying to get the CAC more information specifically on these demand management strategies that Pima County has been looking into for the last several years.
Definitely. Again, we reach out to all of the TMC members and request for their help to educate and bring that information to the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hoyt.
I was not going to do this, but I am now since we're getting into this discussion. I have some serious issues with the committee that the RTA set up with the chairman and vice chairman of the RTA and 3 members of the CAC and some of their direction that has been given. And if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I have some things to pass out that are actually your memo, but I want to highlight some stuff. Give all the sure.
First, skill.
No, I didn't.
I didn't take my blood pressure medicine before I came in, but it really seems like what we're trying to do is not fix things and move things forward, but it's to break what we currently have and do something differently. The CAC committee sent out a memo to the 91 people that applied to fill those 12 positions after the 91 had applied. And they asked for different things. Now, this is not mandatory, but I'm going to get into that as well. They wanted to know their ethnicity and race, their gender, do they have disabilities, their age, they're veterans, which is one thing I would love anyway. Household income, where do you work? This is really an invasion into those people. But the thing that bothers me the most is the first one, is race and ethnicity. We asked the committee to have some diversity. That didn't mean ethnicity. It meant diversity of where you live or different areas of town and stuff like that. This is not mandatory, as you said, but you've all been asked to submit 20 names, of which the 3 members of the CAC have, and as of last count, you have not, Mr. Chairman, for people to narrow it down who would be put on the CAC. You send out this memo asking for ethnicity and how much people make and all that kind of stuff. You say it's not mandatory and you're not going to use it for any information to choose people. Why'd you send it out? Because what'll happen is you're going to have of the 91, maybe 30 of them will submit this stuff voluntarily. A lot of them will not. They feel it's an invasion of their privacy and everything else. What's to keep you from going through and just picking the people that submitted this stuff that fit the criteria? That really the city of Tucson has been searching for. I'm just going to call it for what it is. And I really think this is something I would consider personally calling the Attorney General and asking him to look at. I think you're really crossing the line. I want those 13 positions filled. And like I said, I don't care if there are 13 people of color. That does not matter. There are people of color in my immediate family. But I think you're crossing the line when you're getting down in the weeds in something like this. And I really find it appalling, to be honest with you.
Well, it was definitely a voluntary thing. We did ask.
Voluntary doesn't matter. If they have to submit it before you start choosing the 13 people, anybody that didn't submit it is gone. You can look at these and you can say it. Why would you ask for it if you're not going to use it? I mean, that's a simple question. If you don't need the information, why would you ask for it?
The issue that came up was that we were asking, because I mean, obviously we had a bunch of people that didn't fill any of that out. Okay. As it wasn't filled out, the issue came up. Somebody said that there were people that had planned to fill it in, wanted to fill it in, but because of the lack of time in terms of getting the announcement, filling out the application, all that, decided not to do it. And so at that time, to make sure that they got their applications in and that they would be asked if they wanted to fill it in. Again, just the ones that said that they weren't. So they were going to send it out just to get a bigger tally. If they wanted to submit the information, they could.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mo.
Thank you. I don't know if you recall, Mr. Honey, or Mayor Honey, that we voted on this.
Diversity, not ethnicity.
We included geographic and ethnic diversity. You could go and look at the notes. We voted on this.
Right. It's not legal. How can we vote on ethnicity? State law and federal law doesn't allow you to do that.
Diversity in age, in gender, in geography, and ethnicity. That's what we voted on. And it was very clear. We went round and round and round. So I don't think this particular conversation is listed on the agenda to be had.
It's part of the CAC conversation.
Yeah, but
I realize this is
the
Tucson
framework.
Transportation
This
Authority,
item
but you
is the RTA next framework and plan development process.
And this is part
Mr.
of the
Attorney,
development.
I don't know if you're going to step up on this because it's not listed as a point of discussion, this particular item.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, it is. I mean, I was looking through trying to see if we have something in here about talking about the makeup of the committee. I mean, it's related, but it's, as an attorney, I got to be conservative and tell you, going beyond the materials that at least were in the packet. I don't know that any of this was in the packet. Not specifically on the agenda. So I always advise, and let's not get into trouble by drifting into it. It's.
Mr. Chair, then I would ask, because January seems like a big meeting, that that be put on there as one of the topics to be discussed.
Right.
Because I remember the meeting as well, and I remember, at least from my perspective, it was diversity, as a whole, not that we would be actually going out and picking and choosing and not have the same question about what we'd be doing with this information. So I would, if we can't discuss it now, I'd ask for it to be put on January's agenda.
Mr. Chair, we voted on this. Part of the conversation was diversity in gender and age, in mode of transportation, and also in diversity and ethnicity. All of us were very careful to say that that was not going to be the reason why anyone would get selected, but it would be a consideration. So you can all check the recording, and the attorney can share with us the recording and the notes of what was discussed that day. But right now, I don't think it is appropriate to have this discussion because it is not written as an item on the agenda. I would ask that the information that both Supervisor Scott and the City of Tucson submitted for the RTA framework be considered and shared with the CAC as we reconstitute that committee, that the issues be discussed so that we can add to the framework of the RTA.
And Mr. Chair, I have no problem because I want them to have, I found Supervisor Scott's letter very interesting. And I want them to have everything.
Sure.
What I worry about is because the end goal is to get it passed, which we sometimes forget, I think, on there. So what I don't want it to be is seen as a county, framework, because all of our needs have to be taken into place, or a city's framework, because I think then we run into danger of not being seen as the next RTA. So I have no problem with the CAC having all the information they possibly have, but if it gets out there that it seems like it's being directed by one or two and not organic as a next RTA, I think we run the danger of failure, in my opinion. But I'm one. General, I suppose.
Mr. Chair, if I could, do we have a motion on the floor right now? I've not heard a motion or a second. For purposes of discussion, I will move that we forward this information to the Citizens Advisory Committee for consideration.
Is that in the form of a motion?
That's in the form of a motion for discussion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so now we've got a motion on. I'd like to talk about the specifics of it. I do believe that there's some benefit in getting this information to them. My fear, along with kind of what Mayor Murphy said, is the last thing I want to do is have this citizen go into this with this information coming forward, giving the Citizens Advisory Committee the appearance that they need to rewrite their framework in its entirety. Because if we've done that, we've just disregarded the major piece of work that the Citizens Advisory Committee's done over the last 3 years. So what I would like to say is, if we're sending it forward, is for what I've kind of heard around this table, and that's just for consideration for possible modification or addition. Because the framework that's in place, I think, is pretty solid. There may be things we could add, taken either from the county's perspective or the Move Tucson perspective. Some of those specifics may have a place in there, but I think it'd be good for the new Citizens Advisory Committee, once it's in place, with all 35 folks, the 22 original and the 13 new, to go ahead and readdress that, but not basically not eliminate or replace. It doesn't have to be start all over.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, obviously, again, that would have to be agendized for the CAC to have the conversation. So I just want to be clear, we send the information just for information. We're not asking for any action. At the time it's agendized, obviously, we'll have that conversation at the CAC meeting.
Absolutely, and it's obviously the chairs of the Citizens Advisory Committee will have say in that agendization as
Yeah,
well.
of course. I just want to be clear that we send information out one way all the time for information only. So I just want to make sure that nobody assumes that we're asking them to take action at this time.
Thank you for that clarification.
Chair, I would concur, I think we should send them information and educate them all the time. But I just want to be careful when it looks like direction, whether it be old framework they had, but I want them to consider everything all the time, but not seeing it as direction.
Yeah, just for the record, I also concur with General Maxwell and Mayor Murphy.
Do we have a motion?
Very good. We had a motion and a second.
And a second.
And a second.
Ready for the vote.
All
And
right,
the clarification for information only.
right, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All yes? Motion carries.
Mr. Chair. Can we, I could go on my own, but I'm just asking, I'm pleading for a 5-minute break for all of us.
I will make that motion.
Before we start the next agenda item, can we just take a 5-minute break?
Okay.
All righty, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for obliging us a little bit.
Everybody has that same.
That feeling.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, calling back into session. Moving on to item number 6, cost to complete RTA project statutory mandates and legal requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This is a continuation of the conversation we've been having over the last couple of months. Want to just, let's see this numbers. There we go. Now it's woke up. Okay. No, I thought I woke up. Could you go ahead and advance the next slide? Yeah. Anyway, update where we are today. As you know, with the adoption of the TIF, we programmed to the ballot amounts. And reminding you that we did obligate the fiscal 2020 to 2026 regional funds to the delivery of the RTA plan, directed particularly the obligations associated with and they're articulated in the TIP. We have funds that exceed the amount necessary to deliver the plans at the ballot amount. So we'll be looking at that next, but we also recognize that there are additional costs that we're seeing. We're continuing to work with our jurisdictional partners on cost estimates. As you know, the lead jurisdictions are responsible for identifying and providing the programming of funds to cover the ballot amount. We recognize the costs have exceeded. We recognize that there are previously unforeseen costs such as archaeological, right-of-way, railroad, and other costs that are now being identified in our most recent estimates. And there are a couple of projects that still do have scopes that are a little beyond what the RTA ballot identified. That said, we believe that we're still in the 88 to $131 million range. We're continuing. We're not providing you specific numbers today because I think we've seen a lot of numbers and it's getting a little overwhelming. What I can tell you though is that we're confident that as we continue to iterate, that we are still within that range that we've been talking about with the 88 to $130 million gap. And that's all dependent upon, how we look at or how our revenues come in going forward and what happens with costs on a going forward basis too. We know both are moving. We are also looking at where we stand with the other committed revenues. There were commitments made that were in the ballot to meet the project costs that were identified at the time of the ballot relating to impact fees and to the 97 bonds. We're looking at that right now to make sure that all of these other commitments are being satisfied. For the most part, they have been to date. But we are going to be needing to look at some additional gaps that we're finding, and we'll be talking with the jurisdictions about that over time. As you know, if there are additional costs over and above what are in the scope, as well as any cost overruns, those are identified as being the responsibility of the jurisdictions that are leading the projects. Both as articulated in our administrative code and in the contract documents that we execute with the jurisdictions, the IGAs. Now, that said, we do know that there are additional funds that are available, and we support, or we let you know that the board may support funding requests over the ballot amount. The supplemental funding, however, must be provided for eligible and scope-related cost escalations. In addition to that, we've reviewed different funds that may be drawn upon or may be made available over time. Certainly, lead agencies can bring additional funds for additional elements that they wish to pursue. Again, based upon our annual performance, what we collect, we can make available. And in the way of RTA revenue, and we're recommending that we continue to look at that on an annual basis. I know one of the later items in your agenda is to talk about some funding requests. This is the process that we need to follow through. There will be additional federal and state funds available. We know of the federal money. We know that there's going to be a general increase in the distribution to the region, and there are other options. Certainly, we would hope to take advantage of some of the grant opportunities going forward. There is state direct allocation depending upon how well the state does. We know that the town of Marana was successful in appealing directly to the state for some funds on Tangerine. We applaud that. We encourage that. There may be additional, while we already talked about the federal funds, and certainly, if there's an expansion in scope, that may be something that should be considered as a part of RTA next. That may very well make some sense there. Ineligible expenses, and this is going back to some of the work that Thomas has done. The optional items that have been beyond the scope of the project. We have that. I called out in our policies, objectives, and procedures. That's what we call POPs in this, and those were adopted by the Technical Management Committee, and the original version was actually adopted as a part of the original administrative code by the RTA board. That goes back to 2006. Where funding caps have been exceeded on certain specific items, we did identify some caps that we wanted to put on certain ancillary aspects of projects. That's also identified in the POPs. Utility relocation expenses. There was quite a vigorous discussion about that early in the RTA about what's eligible for reimbursement and what isn't, and that was something that was taken before the Technical Management Committee, and that's articulated in the POPs, and that if there are project element items that are the responsibility of another entity, those should be borne by the other entity. Additionally, there is language that speaks to drainage improvements, limited to those required for the roadway project. I know that's hard to disentangle from regional drainage sometimes, but this is not, the RTA costs must not exceed the local jurisdictional standard practices for dealing with that. Reimbursements will not be made for redesign due to change of project scope or design concept, and that unanticipated costs due to construction risks are the responsibility of the lead agency. Modifications to the scope of RTA projects are acceptable if they don't. Or if the jurisdiction if it involves a cost increase, if the jurisdiction covers the cost of the expansion or the addition to the scope, and the modifications don't diminish the functionality of the project. And that goes back to the original or one of the early RTA board resolutions on functionality. The municipality in which the RTA monies are spent for a project is responsible for maintaining the project once it's built. And that's statutory. And in terms of next steps, we're going to be continuing to work with the Technical Management Committee on reviewing projects as they move forward. As any changes in scopes are being discussed, we'll be talking with them about that. We will be looking at cost estimates with them, and making sure that we call out and identify any features that are just different from what was in the original scope, so that the jurisdictions can both identify whether they want to go forward with them and the costs associated with those ineligible items. And again, RTA board will review annually whether or not there's available funds to commit to additional costs. And with that, that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Any questions for Mr.
Mr.
Green?
Chair,
Yes.
as another item that the city of Tucson has brought to the table, one of the concerns that we've been going over and over and over again are the projects that have not been completed. And this conversation and presentation is part of what the city of Tucson requested to have. So thank you for adding this to the agenda. I feel, and the city of Tucson feels, as though this conversation should be added to every agenda until this board together find solutions for the gaps in funding. The gaps in funds, I mean, the city of Tucson's projected gap in fund is $290 million. And the RTA's projected gap in funds is anywhere from 88 to 190, you said?
Madam Mayor, if I may, we are looking at the 88 to 130 after we apply additional revenues that we have not already committed. So the 290 does not relate to the 88 to 130.
Okay, so what I would suggest, two things, and I'll be doing this in writing, requesting this conversation come to the RTA board so that the RTA board members help us make decisions as where to go. Of course, there are the technical management committees, whatever committees it has to go through. I would suggest we also bring it back here so that we can continue finding solutions for it. Also, keeping the RTA board informed on the numbers from Tucson's projects as well as other projects. I know that there are a couple of other projects from different jurisdictions. We should be looking at the numbers per project as to where the problems exist, so that we can try as a board, which is, I think, at the end of the day, the RTA board is empowered to be able to either approve or deny the funding for each project. What my concern has been and will always be, and I will add it again for the record, is that one of the most important responsibilities that we have as an RTA board is to deliver the program. And if one particular jurisdiction, because we were unfortunate to have the last 5 years of the program for our projects, if we're not able to deliver that program for the residents of the city of Tucson, that means we've failed to deliver the program. So I want to make sure that we're finding the solutions. And I know that Mr. DeGrood and the staff at Transportation and Mobility are having sit downs and trying to figure out. I would encourage you all to continue doing that and to bring these items to the technical committee, as well as wherever it has to go, including this body. So since we don't have numbers and since we don't have clear direction as to how we're going to cure the gap, I would say that we continue this conversation for January, and that again, the executive director brings some solutions, some tangible solutions that we can come to consensus with on how we cover the gap in funding to be able to deliver what we told the voters we would deliver.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just want to clarify that you do have the packet, in your packet, you do have the cost estimates as well as the revenue projections So that's where the 88 to 131 comes from. So those numbers were approved by regional council, and we're still working through modifying those numbers. And when they're warranted to modify, we will.
Sure. Just a quick question, because part of the solution potentially is what we don't know yet. Money's coming in every year. We get an annual update. And I guess my difficulty is, I don't know how to, provide a guarantee when we don't even know what the revenue stream is. I think there's openness to use those monies, for the appropriate scope of doing it, but isn't some of it gonna happen as the monies
Sure.
truly come in or not come in?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy, yes, and that's why we've laid out some options. We believe the projects that are in the pipeline for the next 2 years are going to be delivered with the funding that we have. So that any other solutions or other revenue sources that come to the table are beyond 2 years. And hopefully by then we'll have more information where those other funds will come from. And I want to stress again, RTA Next was part of this solution. We want to make sure that RTA Next is part of the conversation on some of the projects that may need additional revenue beyond 2027.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. Okay, moving on to item number 7. First Avenue project scope change proposal by the city of Tucson.
For today. Mr. Chair.
Were you gonna introduce?
Yeah, I'm
Patrick
sorry.
again?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board, we did receive a request from the city of Tucson to consider the First Avenue River to Grant Road needs assessment. They have been doing some initial analysis. Mr. Hartley is here with us today to discuss the findings that they have. We presented this to the Technical Management Committee last month, and they took it up. They indicated that they'd like to continue to look at this, and as well as other suggestions for scope modifications that might be useful in delivering the projects within the available funds that we have that are coming in. And this was submitted to us in response to a letter that went out, or a request that was made, suggestion that was made by the TMC board chair last summer to identify projects that might be able to conform with the existing needs that the community is seeing, and also might result in reducing the cost exposure to the RTA on the project. So with that, I'd like to introduce Patrick Hartley, who is prepared with his presentation.
Thank you, very much, Mr. DeGrood, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. It's very nice to see you again. I've got a very brief presentation about a request from the city of Tucson to do a scope change. What was listed in the RTA plan is a 6-lane widening for First Avenue between River and Grant to a 4-lane modernization project. And this recommendation is based on a thorough analysis that we did through a First Avenue needs assessment, in which we, the project team, fully considered the functionality of the corridor and considering it within the context of the updated traffic projections, numbers, and needs within Pima County. Really looking at an opportunity to evaluate this corridor in the context of the information that's available to us today. So as you'll recall, the First Avenue project is item number 14 in the current RTA plan. The project description is as follows. It is from River Road to Grant, widen to a 6-lane roadway, add bike lanes and sidewalks. And it was identified in 2006 dollars as a $75 million project, with about 71.4 of that coming from the RTA, 3 million coming from the city through development impact fees. A little bit of context on the location of the corridor. So it is about a 3-mile roadway. Currently 5 lanes, 4 travel lanes, 1 center or 2-way left turn lane, which matches the 4-lane roadway to the south of Grant Road. And what we're proposing would be to update it to make it a 4-lane divided roadway, really matching the corridor to the north. So it would provide that uniformity along the extent of the corridor between the 4 lanes to the south, the 4 lanes to the north, and maintaining that 4-lane in the project area. So why did we do this needs assessment? So we wanted to really evaluate before we get into the more detailed design work and identify how those needs have evolved along the corridor before we really commit to a scope and a design. So it has been 15 years since the RTA plan was approved, and the needs at that time evaluated what the traffic projections would be on First Avenue out till 2030. As we're all well aware, our needs have evolved extensively. At that time, they were estimating a population in Pima County of 1.5 million people by 2030 and very significant travel growth along this corridor, which has never materialized in the 15 years since this plan was approved. So we wanted to relook at it with our updated assumptions and where we've seen the last couple of years of growth to make sure we were responding to that and delivering the needs of the corridor as they reflect the needs today, not the needs as they were identified in 2006. The policy framework of the city has also changed significantly as we've passed the Complete Streets policy, and we're now looking at a wider range of considerations as we look at these improvements beyond just traffic mobility. We want to make sure that we're delivering a lot of multimodal benefits and exploring the trade-offs kind of between the different user groups along these corridors. So that framework was always front and center as we did this analysis. We needed to update our cost estimates as, again, we're 15 years later on. We needed to incorporate the effects of inflation on what it would cost to deliver this project, as well as the escalating cost of materials and property acquisition. And we wanted to make sure that we were right-sizing the public investment before we went into the more detailed design work, because we didn't want to be entering the design and thinking about, all right, we've got these multiple alternatives as we get kind of bogged down in that discussion. This was a much cleaner way for the city of Tucson to move forward. So then as we advance into planning design, we can do it with a single scope, which would help us to be more efficient in the use of public funds and expedite the planning design process as we get locked into IGAs with the RTA. As Jim mentioned, we did submit this under an agenda item that was in response to a request, an invitation of ideas from the RTA to look at opportunities to how these projects can be delivered within budget, but providing the base functionality that was promised to the voters in the 2006 plan. I've got a little bit of evidence that can show how we can demonstrate that today. Coincidentally, this was also submitted with a request from Pima County to also look at downscoping the First Avenue project within the county. So the entire corridor was really being considered. I believe that will probably be heard on a future agenda item. So as I mentioned, we were looking at 2 project alternatives, the 4-lane cross section with a modernization. As you can see, it would include a continuous median, sidewalks, bike lanes, or the 6-lane, again, median, sidewalks, bike lanes, which would be a representation of what was described in the RTA plan. Looking at the cost estimates of the 2 with the updated using 2019 numbers, we estimate that the 4-lane project, again, we know that there's been 2 years of kind of cost escalation since this came out, but we're looking at about $73.2 million for a planning estimate for just delivering this project, which is much closer to the RTA ballot amount. The 6-lane puts us at about $91.6 million estimated. And as you saw in the memo, there are some outstanding cross drainage issues that I think we're still starting the conversation with RTA staff on kind of what elements of that can be incorporated into this project envelope and which of those are more regional flood control issues. So very briefly, some of the existing conditions that we looked at, we know that we need to replace the bridge over the Rito. We have this, it's at 80% of its functional life, of its 75-year lifespan. It's probably got 10 to 15 more years on it before we're looking at weight restrictions. So as part of this project, it's an opportunity for us to do a replacement and upgrading it to current standards. From a safety perspective, we see that First Avenue really underperforms some of the parallel corridors in the same area of the city. Most obviously, I think with the pedestrian crashes, where you see double the number of pedestrian crashes on First Avenue as you see on Oracle, Stone, or Campbell, even though the traffic volumes on Oracle are higher and the operating environment is very similar for those different corridors. So there's an underlying certain safety need on this corridor and a structural challenge that we'd like to address through this modernization project. in terms of the facilities that are being provided for those multimodal users of the corridor, only about 64% of the roadway has current sidewalk coverage, but we know that there's high pedestrian activity along this roadway. There's high frequent transit route that operates on it. That's going to be driving some of that pedestrian activity. And in particular, that segment between Prince and Fort Lowell, you see a lot of activity at the intersections is what that table on the right indicates. And that is also one of the highest concentrations of pedestrian crashes in the city of Tucson, which has landed the First Avenue corridor on the City of Tucson Identified Pedestrian High Injury Network, which was identified through the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, meaning it's in the top 10% of corridors for pedestrian crashes in the city of Tucson. First Avenue is also located in an area where you see a high concentration of transportation disadvantaged populations, meaning there's a higher concentration of low-income residents, people who are over 75, under the age of 10, people of color, people with limited access to an automobile, really driving a lot of that demand for transit ridership and those alternative modes that we're trying to be responsive to. From a vehicle mobility perspective, what we've seen is that for about the last 23 years, traffic volumes on First Avenue have been declining. So about a 1% year-over-year decline on First Avenue between 1998 and 2021. So that's what we were taking into account as we did our modeling and thinking about what the future needs are and demonstrating the functionality of the corridor. So we looked at two traffic projections from the existing out till 2045 using PEG's 2019 traffic modeling data. And we're seeing about a 16 to 30%, 36% modeled increase in traffic volumes from the low to the high scenario.
Back on that one real quick.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What does that mean, Patrick?
So currently we have 28,000 vehicles per day. Our projection for 2045 on the low scenario using PEG's model is 32,000 vehicles per day, an increase of about 4,000 vehicles per day on the corridor, or 60% growth. The high projection puts us at about 38,000 vehicles per day, or a 36% increase. What I'll be able to demonstrate on the subsequent slides is how this compares against what the modeled outcomes from the 2006 RTA plan were and how this affects the capacity of that corridor. So under the initial review that we did, we compared the 6-lane alternative to the 4-lane alternative on the underlying 2019 model assumptions. But I think the challenge before us today is really to demonstrate that we are meeting the functionality test that the board has laid out and that was described in the memo that the RTA issued, and that we are delivering the expected benefits with the original RTA plan. So the assumptions of 2006 with that 1.5 million population growth. I won't get bogged down in these, but basically between the high scenario and the low scenario, we're estimating that in 2045, we're going to be seeing between 11 and 25% less traffic on First Avenue, just from a function of population growth, than we were anticipating in 2006 for 2030. So 25% less traffic, 15 years later into the future. Same thing, here's the high and the low scenario, the same relationship you see at the intersection. So we look at this at intersections and segments. Again, between 7 and 17% less traffic than was projected for 2030 in 2045. And a real quick comparison of this, essentially what this means is that the 4-lane alternative that the city of Tucson is proposing is on the high scenario performs equal to what the RTA plan identified for 2030 as a performance outcome. And on the low scenario outperforms from a traffic mobility standpoint what was in the 2006 plan and promised to voters for 2030. So we're demonstrating that we are able to provide that mobility outcome that was promised to voters at a lower cost with less impact. This is essentially saying that. So we wanted to go through the kind of the multimodal functionality test on this corridor to demonstrate that we're able to deliver the full functionality of this corridor at a lower cost and a lower impact to property without widening the roadway. So from a vehicle mobility perspective, as I just mentioned, the low growth scenario outperforms what was anticipated for 2030 in 2045. And the high growth performs about equally in 2045 to what was promised in 2030. So in terms of whether functionality was diminished, I think we can say no in that case. Transit service, the transit operations are going to remain similar because the operating environment on the roadway will remain similar. Both projects, be it the 6-lane or the 4-lane, provide an opportunity for transit priority at intersections. That's going to be something that we can resolve in design. Is the functionality diminished in that case for transit service? It is not. In terms of pedestrian amenities, both are providing continuous sidewalks, and the modernization option actually reduces crossing distances, vehicle exposure on the roadway. And we know that one of the drivers of this project and one of the key concerns is that pedestrian safety issue. So in this case, from a pedestrian, the functionality is not diminished and is probably actually enhanced. Bicycle facilities, same question, both will provide continuous bicycle lanes built to the current standard, which in the city of Tucson is now enhanced bike lanes, complying with our complete streets. The functionality is not diminished. The drainage, same issue. Both projects would replace aged on-site storm drainage infrastructure, which is now reaching the end of its 50-year lifespan. And both projects are going to require additional consideration of cross drainage for full functionality. That doesn't change regardless of if we're looking at the 6-lane option or the 4-lane option. The intersections, both projects reconfigure intersections to improve safety and traffic flow. Again, no diminishment of functionality. Both would replace the bridge. Both would provide access control through that raised median. So we're delivering on that functionality. We're going to be able to do it for 20% lower cost, and we're going to be able to do it with fewer acquisitions of private property, fewer takings, which is one of the major drivers of that cost reduction. As part of this, we also had about 3 months of public input, including working with a consultant firm to walk the entire corridor and meet with all of the businesses on First Avenue to seek their input on it. We received about 1,100 survey responses, and by about a 2-to-1 margin, the people responded to this process preferred the 4-lane modernization alternative. And that wasn't just conducted in the city of Tucson. We did receive responses countywide. Obviously, most of them are clustered in the project area, but what was an interesting takeaway was that in all locations, respondents to the survey preferred the 4-lane alternative. Now, the margins were certainly much higher closer to the corridor, but even those who were kind of north and using it primarily as a commuter spine still preferred the 4-lane alternative. And with all that information and that demonstration of the functionality being maintained on the corridor, Tucson's mayor and council did approve the downscope to this project in September of 2019. We are in front of you today asking for agreement with mayor and council's decision and opportunities to downscope so we can begin the process of getting the IGAs in place and opening up planning design. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I wasn't expecting that we move with a motion today.
Oh,
I think it's important that we have a conversation and then come back in January and approve this. I think that, you know, the extensive community engagement and studies that happened to get us to this point, and mayor and council did hear, I think he said September 2019, but it was September of this year that we had the opportunity to.
Yeah, so it was just 2 months back or
Okay.
3 months back.
So it was just 2 months back that the mayor and council heard and saw this presentation. We want to get and approved it unanimously to bring it to the RTA board for approval of this change. We really are trying to look as a city of Tucson on ways to diminish the gap in funding that we have without affecting the functionality and the delivery of what the projects that were promised to the voters of the city of Tucson and of course the voters of Pima County. So I'd like for all of us to consider, I think the technical management committee is still looking and reviewing this particular project, but I just wanted to make sure that you all saw this, that you saw the numbers and had a presentation from the city of Tucson to consider this project and move it forward for funding and for us to complete the IGAs. You know, there's we hear that there is a drainage concern, which is more of a distraction because the drainage conversation would happen whether it's a 6-lane or a 4-lane conversation on this. Other than that, I think it's important for us to understand that a 6-lane roadway would cost, what is it, $20 million more, would be an interruption to the small locally owned businesses on First Avenue, and that the businesses on First Avenue do not want to see that property acquisition to create a 6-lane roadway. With that, this is an enhanced 4-lane divided roadway, safer than the current suicide lane that we have running down First, with an extra 5th lane to make sure that we have a safe turning lane and access for safe bike lanes and pedestrian. So it's a multimodal. Other than that, I look forward to continued discussion and bringing back this item for your vote in January. We're gonna have a long meeting in January.
Mr. Chair, when I was looking at that, the only part I struggled with is what we told the voters of the whole county we were going to deliver. And I don't know, I'd have to ask staff, you know, when you downscope something that you promised, one, can you do it? For us, it's more, should we do it? On there, I was trying to think of an analogy. You know, I ordered a 8-passenger SUV from the dealer, and I arrive and they say, well, here's your pretty 5-passenger vehicle. And I'm like, well, I wanted an 8-passenger vehicle. So I'm glad, thanks for not asking for a motion today. So I had a couple of those questions on, you know, downscoping and do we have the authority? And I think for the next RTA, I think those are some of the conversations we probably need to have. You know, in 10 years in, do we, as an example, you know, do we get to go back to the voters and say, you know, do you downscope? Can we downscope because you know, things have changed? I guess the other question is, what did we model back then? What didn't happen? Was there big housing development to the north that just didn't happen? How did it sort of get so skewed?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy, I would submit that it's a number of things that have happened. We were expecting to be at, I believe, a 1.3 million population in the region about the time that the RTA plan concluded. We're going to be substantially less than that in terms of general overall growth within the region. That's part of our funding problem too, is that those taxpayers never showed up to kick into our plan. So, you know, it's both sides of it there. I would add that we are seeing changes in the way people use our roads and in transportation as well. So that probably has a bearing on it as well. I think one could go into much greater detail and probably should to answer you properly on that. But those are some observations that I would share.
Mr. Chair, if I may add to that. So some of those conversations came up at the management committee and they did want to have it on their agenda again to discuss it further. The drainage issue is a significant financial issue. It's roughly a $30 million commitment that regardless of which option you choose, that $30 million has to be identified to address the flooding issue as well.
Didn't I see on Jim's last slides, though, that was one of the things that we can't do?
That is correct. We do not pay for anything that's not related to the roadway drainage itself. That's why it needs to be identified, regardless of which option, to be able to address it.
Mr. Chair, I had a question for Mr. DeGrood. You mentioned, and Mayor Romero alluded to this as well, that TMC wants to continue its discussion of this project before making a recommendation to us. Can you let us know what factors they are still weighing before they make a recommendation to the board? And then I have a follow-up.
Okay, in terms of factors, I can't specifically lay that out, just as you're seeing this for the first time, they were seeing that for the first time as well. I think there's going to be some further thought development on that on part of the members. I would add that there are other projects that were also being discussed and about potential proposals as well. So they were looking, that I believe they wanted to look at a broader range of those as well at the same time. So we're working actually with jurisdictional staff on a number of different projects that we may want to look at fine tuning scopes on to make them more responsive to today's and our anticipated future needs. Excuse me. And that is in terms of reductions. There's also a number of projects where there's desired expansions that are based on realized traffic growth and current needs. Now those might be fodder for, or might be appropriately delegated to a future RTA next, or it basically would be presented to the board for their consideration.
Mr. Chair, if I may just add to that. So there were two specific things that they wanted to look at the legislation. We actually provided a copy of the RTA legislation for them to review prior to the next meeting. So that'll be a topic of their discussion. And then they also wanted to look at any examples of any previous RTA example that projects that have a similar scope change. And to this date, we have not had any reduction in scope, but they wanted to kind of have that opportunity to discuss how previous projects were addressed. We do have examples of projects that added to scope with additional funding, but obviously we'll have the range of any examples of any scope changes so they can talk about that and then use that information to make their decision.
So thank you for that. So the follow-up question I had is related to a topic that was addressed in the city's presentation, which is that the county requested a change to our First Avenue project, the one north of Orange Grove. And I'm gathering the TMC has not made a recommendation on that either. I'm wondering if it's possible that the TMC could make a recommendation to this board holistically, dealing with both the county and the city proposal for First Avenue. I realize there are different considerations. We're asking for funds to be shifted to another RTA project, whereas the city's request is of a different nature. But I do think it's important that that corridor be looked at holistically. So where is the TMC with considering the county's recommendation?
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Scott, along those lines, as Jim mentioned earlier, it really was more of a conversation at the committee level. The chair requested for input ideas. So that was their first meeting after they received the ideas. There were 3 ideas submitted. So it's really still at the committee level. I don't think they anticipate that they're going to be able to have a recommendation to you anytime soon, especially if you're looking at a more comprehensive perspective. I don't believe they'll be ready by January, but obviously that's something that we can ask them to start looking at it. Their goal was to look at it from a more kind of a comprehensive perspective, to have all the suggestions move forward at the same time.
So they were going to look at not just the 2 First Avenue suggestions, they were going to look at some other.
Exactly. And we're still hoping that we'll get additional ideas from other members. We only received suggestions from 2 of the 9 members.
Okay. All right. So if we brought this back to our agenda on January, as Mayor Romero is proposing, that would we'd be asking to be making a decision before the TMC made a recommendation to us. Isn't that correct?
Potentially. And again, I think that's really the question for this board, that do you want to wait until you have input from your advisory committees before you make a decision?
Well, it seems to me that if we set up those committees to advise us appropriately, and one of the things that I've heard from county staff since taking this position is that we always want to show respect for articulated processes. It sounds like we should be moving in that direction. with all due respect to everything that the city has done, and that was in a very extensive presentation, I think the TMC needs an opportunity to chew on all that, as well as the proposal that we made for our section of First Avenue.
Definitely. Again, that's the full intent. And so if you recall, there was no timeline on the request,
Right.
and they're still waiting for, if anything, I would encourage other members to submit ideas as well, so they can really look at it more comprehensively. In addition to that, especially on scope changes, we typically engage our citizens committee as well.
The proposal for additional recommendations was made by Mr. Huckleberry. And when he was chairing the committee, who is in the position to remind members, hey, we'd still like your
So
suggestions.
we've done that twice already. We'll be
Okay,
happy
all
to
right.
do it again. I think
May I be getting
maybe,
it?
well, thank you for that segue. So maybe I'm asking the board to really
Okay.
direct us to ask again.
All right.
You know,
Well, I'd be happy to move that if the TMC is looking for that recommendation from the board.
Again, I think it would be helpful, even working with the TMC chair at the time. We only received one member input.
And it was his.
We put out we put out a second request, and we received another one. And again, we appreciate everybody's. They're busy and all that, but we had hoped that there'd be a little bit more engagement. So if anything, informally, please ask your staff to look at it and submit their information.
you know,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. It's always hard to sit behind the supervisor. You can't see, but first off, Mayor, thank you for killing the motion right away, because I think this is a much bigger discussion. And for the record, I would argue we have had this issue with one of the projects being downsized before, and that was Broadway. And I think we remember how Broadway started out as an 8-lane road. Originally, the argument was whether it should be 6 or 4. There were people in the community that were pushing very strongly to keep it at 4. And I think the solution that came out of it, which was a 6-lane road, was done correctly through at least with the final outcome. But that being said, it got way out of the control of the RTA board. And I'd hate to see that come again. So I appreciate having these conversations. And I think we need to find a way to run our processes. And I would recommend that we don't make any really move forward without the TMC's recommendation as well, because that's a committee established by this board for these kind of purposes. As a daily user of Sunrise to Prince on First Avenue, I will tell you, I've got a lot of hesitancies with this idea. Not that we need to go to 6 yet, but even based on the data that we were presented today, the acknowledgement was, yes, it's not growing as much as that the original RTA predictions had, but it's still growing. And I can tell you right now, the traffic on First is way heavier than Stone. And trust me, I've tried them all. I've tried Campbell, I've tried Stone, First. It's all, for me, it is a commuter issue, but it is a heavily trafficked road with huge pedestrian concerns. Much of which, I know by going to 4 instead of 6, we're going to reduce the width people have to bluntly jaywalk. Yeah. But now you're adding a median in the middle. That's a place for them to stand with potential shrubs, trees, and other things to hide. And at night, which is when that road is particularly concerning from a pedestrian standpoint. And it's one that both my wife and myself drive daily and quite often at night if we're coming from Tucson or coming from the U of A or any of that. And you're just hoping nobody's going to walk out in front of you, because it does happen on a routine basis. So I do think that's something that's got to truly be studied. Is this really going to be a solution for a pedestrian issue, or is it just they're going to take another form? So I think that is one issue that we have to take a hard look at.
General, can I
Absolutely.
ask Patrick to come up to and respond to that? Because in terms of studying, we've done our homework.
I understand, and I appreciate the delay in the motion, because I want to get the study that you've done.
And I think it's
seen
important.
it all.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important that we do wait and make sure that the TMC has all of the information to be able to make this this change. And I appreciate you clarifying the other downscoped work in terms of Broadway. But can you respond to the studies
Yeah,
that
a
we've
couple
done?
things. So putting in a continuous median is one of the most effective things you can do for pedestrian safety because it breaks up that crossing. And if people are going to be crossing against the signal, we would much rather have them standing on a raised median than standing in a two-way left turn lane. So a lot of the studies have shown 30–40% reduction in pedestrian crashes just by the installation of a raised median alone. That's also going to improve traffic flow because you're going to get rid of some of the side conflicts of turning vehicles, everything else, and the access management to the adjacent businesses. Moreover, we'd also be looking at a number of intersection improvements. So we shouldn't be treating this as a no-build alternative. A lot of the delay that we do see at First Avenue, and quite frankly, in most of our corridors in the city of Tucson, is not a segment issue, it's an intersection issue. Now, if you're part of the traveling public, that doesn't mean anything to you, but the delay is happening at the intersections. We've got the capacity to support the through movement. We've got a lot of intersections on First Avenue where we don't have dedicated right turn lanes. Without that right turn lane and that heavy pedestrian volume, you create that built-in conflict as you wait for those right turning vehicles. It's slowing down the efficiency of that intersection. So we're really going to focus on those efficiency improvements, getting the throughput safely through those intersections without the necessity of the impacts of that 6-lane corridor.
No, appreciate that. And I do agree with you that it is an intersection problem. It's a slow move along from intersection to intersection and throughout that day. There's one thing that I ask us just to consider. Right? We just had a discussion on shortfalls and what we're doing. And the reality is, and I've already said it once out loud, and it's only my personal opinion, but 2024 is no later, as kind of a drop dead no later than when we want to have the RTA on the panel. That means we're already cutting RTA 1 2 years short. So we've talked about, I heard the executive director say that RTA Next has always been part of the solution. I don't necessarily agree that it's always been part of the solution, but it is a possible use of the solution. And if we're going to take a scope on a $75 million project and change it significantly, that may be a perfect candidate for something that we would want to be the first or second project out the chute in RTA Next. And we've talked about, the equitability on who's getting what with that. Anything that goes from RTA 1 into RTA Next is kind of like below the line when we start talking about the equitability of the projects. But if we're going to make a significant change where we're already concerned about shortfalls, that may be a perfect project to say, let's take a look, redesign it like it's done, because if the city's done their homework, you've got a good plan in place, and then consider that moving forward. And now that 75 million possible shortfall frees up to finish another project that is not requiring any change of scope or anything else from our original RTA plan, just for consideration. Because again, I personally will do a lot more look on this one. I am a little concerned with the flow, and actually that could be great if you could provide us some information on, because putting those medians in the middle is to be very much like Campbell, as I understand it, when you look at the 4-lane breakout with the
Could be more continuous median like we've installed on Grant.
because those breakup in the medians have led to a lot, my opinion, from what I've seen having my place of work down on that avenue, a lot of other side accidents and a lot of confusion, because you've still got people ducking into those medians to try to turn in, but now they're ducking in, leaving half their car out. So it'd be great if you do have any data on that flow, and then to identify the differences would help as well. And again, I think this is one we've got to consider. I am concerned because there are going to be people, and again, we're talking voters, so we're talking every vote's important when we get to the RTA project. They're going to say, well, look, you didn't build Broadway 8, you didn't build first 6. And if it's not necessary, and the data shows it's not necessary, that's great. But I am concerned that we're still seeing an increase in traffic flow, because I believe First Avenue's traffic is significantly different from Stone, Campbell, and some others.
Mayor Romero?
Thank you. Had your hand up.
My question was asked by.
Okay. Mr. Chair, with all due respect, General, we have no reason to wait anymore. I feel as though the city of Tucson has carried the load on waiting on projects. And if we are going to have an RTA Next, I believe that the people of the city of Tucson need to see the tangible results of their investment. And so I would not want to wait any longer. I would want the TMC to study it, to take a look at everything that we've done in terms of traffic flows, the intersection work that we want to do there, and the multimodal aspect and element of it. And really, as Patrick mentioned, First Avenue, there's a lot of crashes and fatalities. And so in terms of safety, in terms of us being ready, of us doing our homework, of us contacting people, not just in the immediate area, but throughout the foothills and throughout other areas of the community that use First Avenue, we're ready to go. And we would much rather start moving so that we have that tangible results for the voters of Tucson. So we have seen a downscoped project, and which is Broadway, and so it's not the only project that we're trying to downscope before. I think we do have much more of a consensus of the businesses and the people that have been surveyed than we did on Broadway. And so it makes sense to move forward, but I do want to respect the advice and feedback of the TMC. And so if it's not ready in January, we could hear it in February, but I would much rather we look at it in January and by the way, this is a perfect opportunity for the city of Tucson to contribute to the concern of not having enough money to be able to deliver this project to the voters.
And Mayor Romero, when I was talking about the possibility of moving it, I think at some point, and I think it's important that the board considers this, and because I think it's a reality, is there's going to be some projects that when we go forward to RTA next are going to be part of that. Because remember, we can't say we're going to complete RTA when you're not allowed to have a 2-year overlap of the two plans. So when RTA next passes, whatever the implementation date, it's now the RTA. The plan from the past is no longer in full existence. So perhaps maybe the conversation we need to focus on is what projects of the remaining list are possibilities that would make sense to roll into RTA next. And if it's not First Avenue because you're ready to roll, I agree, it's not First Avenue because you're ready to roll. It's something for consideration.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just add, because I know we had this conversation before, and I didn't want the confusion out there, that if you're doing the project in the 18th year of a 20-year plan, that's no different than the first year of a 2-year early plan.
Correct.
Which is still 2024, just using that as an example. And sometimes I think that gets confused, that we think we're adding 2 more years to a delay of a project as opposed to a do-over early, which gets completed in the same year, maybe with even a little more money, but we're still.
And it also gives us an opportunity to redesign under that new plan that you're going. So all this talk, when we're talking about making changes to plans and scopes, if the exact same project is now put into the next plan under a slightly different scope, now you've already addressed the things. I mean, we know that in the next RTA, in the RTA next, we're going to have to come up with some ability partway through the 20-year plan to assess and see if all the scopes and everything matches. And so you're absolutely correct. We can't lose sight on it's not kicking the can. It's just starting at the same time
This
at a
year, I
different.
was actually absolutely correct. So thank you for that.
It took you till December.
Yeah, that's all it took.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, again, it's really important to include in the request the solution to the funding for the floodplain, because as I said, that is a issue that if we don't have a resolution, then regardless of which option you choose, the project cannot move forward without that solution.
More comments? Okay. Moving on to the next item is executive session. I do have a question about that. I know we have, I looked it up in the ARS data, but it says that there's an exception to the executive session for interstate work and such. And I was just wondering, the last 2 didn't have anything on about interstate, and I was wondering why we're going to executive session.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The issue is that we have contracts that have to be negotiated. So there are legal issues with that. So if you want, you can have an executive session. It's allowed. It's under the A4 part of the statute, which is contracts that are subject to negotiation. And then there's also, we always have the legal advice, which is the A3 subsection of the statute. So if you wish, you may have an executive session for those limited purposes. For directing the staff with respect to contracts under negotiation or for legal advice and/or for legal advice.
Chair, if I may, if you recall, last May, we had executive session and had a discussion in executive session, and this is really a follow-up to that conversation.
Mr. Chair, I also have concerns about going into executive session. And we asked Mike Rankin, our city attorney, in terms of why we would have this conversation in an executive session. There are certain issues that can be discussed, and there are only certain issues that the RTA board, any council or board of supervisors should go into executive session for. Yes, there are legal issues, but it doesn't seem as though it's absolutely necessary for us to go into executive session, especially because these projects have been approved. So what Mr. Rankin suggested that I ask is to explain the purpose of the executive session. The item specifically identifies only the discussion on the board's position relating to the IGAs connected to the listed projects. And then also in terms of the members of the board, it puts me, especially since two of the projects that we're going into executive session for, in a complicated situation, especially if there's going to be legal advice on projects that are City of Tucson projects that I have to go to my council and be able to discuss with them about the specific position that the RTA board is going to have to take. So going into executive session puts those members into an impossible position where they are bound by the confidentiality requirements of the executive session statutes as it relates to the board's discussions in executive session. And yet I still need to represent the best interests of my own jurisdiction when it comes before them. So if the RTA legal counsel has an opinion that implicates these contracts, why don't we just discuss them openly and have the RTA counsel contact the city attorney or town attorney, because I see Tangerine and Sunset are also part of the executive session, and that's the county and what is it, Marana. So contact the city attorney or town attorney or the county attorney to work through these issues, which usually intergovernmental agreements are discussed by legal counsel in our different jurisdictions. It's not typical to have councils or boards discuss intergovernmental agreements in executive sessions. So yeah, if the issue involves making sure we carry out the will of the voters in administering the RTP, we should do that in the open where the voters can see and hear and not behind closed doors. So I just warn us, especially those jurisdictions that are here, it could complicate the conversations we can have with our separate boards and councils.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and then obviously I want to ask Thomas to help with that. So again, we can't discuss what was discussed at the executive session back in May, but I believe the request for legal review and coming back to you was consistent with what we're doing. We have completed our analysis of the request, and we want to provide a legal review of that to the board. My understanding is that individual members, if they believe they have a reason to recuse themselves, they could recuse themselves from that one item. And then hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation with the balance of the board. And what we're looking for is really that direction from the board to be able to start the negotiation with individual members. So we're seeking your direction. We can do it just now, give us direction, or we can do it after you receive the legal advice.
So can I, Mr. Chair, if I could ask a question, so to clarify, the direction you're looking for is we've got $30 million and we've got $40 million in requests. So the direction you're looking for is how we're gonna, where that money's gonna go?
Direction we're looking for is to allow Thomas and myself to start discussions with individual entities that made requests, so we can come back to you with an amendment to an agreement. The details of that, the terms and conditions of the potential amendment would be something that we would want to get hopefully your position on it. But if you want to just direct us to go ahead and proceed without that, we'll be happy to do that.
So I guess the follow-up to that is when you go, what you're asking is to start the discussions, is that going to be on all 4 of those projects and trying to negotiate the
That's our
intergovernmental
request
agreements?
to do it
So-
individually with each entity, yes.
So try to get, so it's not like we're going in there to discuss, because I think one of the concerns when I first read this was that we're going to be giving direction behind in an executive session for our justifications why we're kind of prioritizing these 4 initiatives, because if
No,
that's
sir.
not what we're doing.
No, sir, no, we're just seeking your authorization for us to start the amendment process and have that conversation, and then come back with a proposed amendment. But in the meantime, the legal advice is what we believe is beneficial to you.
Well, Thomas, I think. But I was just, Mr. Chairman, sorry, members of the board, I was just gonna say, it's about, if you're beginning a negotiation, your negotiation team needs to know where you're at on an issue, where, because we interpret the statutes and the policies and procedures. And so then we move forward and we say, here's our position. But it's for you to instruct us if that's consistent with your will or not. But you don't have, I just want to reiterate, you don't have to do it in executive session. I mean, I have to tell you, you don't have to, but you may, but so we have it on there for you if you want to, but you can do
Mr.
it.
Chairman,
You can do it in public.
Mr. Chairman. I don't really see the purpose or rationale for going into executive session to give you direction to go and negotiate with the 3 jurisdictions that you have here. It could implicate the 3 jurisdictions that are here. It would complicate things. First and foremost, simple discussion. I would be willing to move that you start negotiating with the jurisdictions that are represented in these projects, and that you come back to us and be able to give us your input, feedback. Those negotiations, look, I've been dealing with intergovernmental agreements for at least 20 years. And so in working as a project manager with our county attorneys at the time, that's where I was doing my project work, it is very typical that county attorneys deal directly with city attorneys to figure out the push and pulls of projects. So I would be willing to make a motion that you start the process so that these projects start moving and those funds get start moving to build those projects. So that's it.
Second. If I may, Mr. Chair. Again, obviously, we do that on a regular basis. We have the conversations on a regular basis. I think it's the legal aspect of the position that we would like to have your support on before we start the negotiation. We can do it in absence of that and then come back later, or we can do it with your support so that negotiations are hopefully more meaningful and fruitful.
Mr. Chair, could I ask Are you looking, will it be better, because I'm very easy supporting the most of the motion and the second, but if you're telling us you're looking for some input from us on your strategy or how you're gonna do it, I mean, I just tell you, go negotiate the 40 million down to 30 and get all 4 projects done, but I don't know if you feel uncomfortable going forward without it, then I would support going and do an executive session, but I just don't understand.
Again, thank you for asking the question. We have been discussing these projects for a while and we have not reached a resolution. So I believe I need your support to be able to really have a more clear direction on how we need to continue with the negotiations.
Mr. Chair, we're in discussion. I won't support the motion, but I would support the next motion that I'm just confused at this point. And I would love to hear from our attorney, because he is our attorney, and to hear what's going on. So I would prefer a short executive, me personally, to understand a little bit further.
Are you making a substitute motion then, Mayor
Yes,
Murphy?
make
I
a
would
substitute.
second it, because I'm confused too.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, and that's up to you, individual members may be able to recuse themselves if they don't want to be part of the
No,
discussion. on their project.
Mr. Chair, that is a very precarious situation that you're going to put the county, the city, and Marana in, because we need to go back to our councils and our board to be able to communicate what we need to communicate to get our projects done to our councils. And so what I'm concerned about, and what our city attorney is concerned about too, is that we would have to recuse ourselves, the three of us, when this item comes to the city or the town of Marana or the Board of Supervisors. And so that puts us in a very difficult position. I don't want you all to go into executive session and decide what happens with these projects, because we also have the possibility of staying outside of executive session, but that would not be fair, would it? So I would say that, there's a motion and a second on the floor. I don't know if, there's two motions going on right here.
There's a substitute motion. Madam Mayor, I fully understand, and I think that's right, and I wouldn't be comfortable if we were going in and deciding what projects to support, what ones to push harder. I think that's totally out, and if that's why I asked the clarity on what is it we're going to talk about. So if that's the case, I'm 100% in agreement. That conversation has to happen in public.
Yeah.
If we're going to decide between these three, which ones we're favoring, that should be a conversation in public for the entire board. If it's just trying to get a clarification, I'll be honest, and I think Supervisor Scott looked at me and said, I'm lost. I don't understand what it is we're going to talk about anywhere. And it's hard for me to have an opinion either way.
So I guess the question is, what is it that we need to not to talk into executive session that can't happen in public session?
Mr. Chairman, sorry, it's just for legal advice and direction to us on our negotiating position. I'm really I don't want to have executive sessions that are not supported by the entire board. I mean, they're disfavored in the law. And I really now just hearing this discussion, it's just making me nervous. I'm not sure we should have an executive session. And
I
there's a motion on the floor.
I withdraw my second then to the substitute motion, hearing Mr. Benavides say that. And, I think part of the issue is the way this agenda item was phrased. I mean, it's clearly confusing to the members. That's why we're having this discussion. So hearing that from Mr. Benavides, I don't see that we have any choice then but to support the motion that Mayor Romero made and Mayor Honey seconded. When our attorney is now saying, well, now I'm concerned about us going into executive session. So I call the question on the original motion.
Any other discussion?
Could you clarify for staff what the actual motion is?
Sure, just what Mr. Rankin suggested. that each council do, that the RTA council contact our city, town, and county attorney to work through the issues that are concerning the RTA executive director and council.
That's what the second, is that your second? The second is, yeah.
Work through the.
Mayor Hooney's the second, right?
I was gonna move item 9.
What is item 9?
No, I mean, I agree that as much as we can talk about, we have executive sessions at the town all the time and discuss with our attorneys and professional staff what we should take on an action, but we have to come out in a public meeting and say what the action is. It doesn't mean that your legal consultation with your staff attorney or planning people has to be a public meeting, but but your action does have to be, and that's kind of what I thought we were talking about.
So for the motion and the second, can I just clarify that staff is directed to negotiate under the fiduciary responsibility that we have as a regional council to bring projects in within the legal scope of how these projects should be.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, really, that's the guidance we're looking for to
I'll make sure that's part of the motion.
Okay, thank you.
so to give us the guidance to make sure that as we're negotiating, that the board is supportive of that position.
Right.
Yeah.
And the position, as I understand it, is you're trying to get all these projects, enough negotiation with all the three entities that are at this table to get to the position where you'll be able to use the 30 million that we've got in the NOFA to supplement the costs that are, those have been requested by those 4 projects. And right now
With the legal authority
Agreed.
and
and right now the numbers don't match, and that's what you're trying to get to.
within the legal authority, using the statute, using your policies. Again, like I said, we negotiate all the time. That this is unique because this is the first time we're going over the RTA ballot amount. And for that reason, we wanted to have your support. So as we start the negotiation, hopefully everybody agrees that we have the board support. We can do it with the motion as it is with that addition, because that really is something we need, or we can do it with additional legal discussion. And as Mayor Honey said, you still come back out and you still have a conversation in the open with that additional legal opinion.
I'd be happy to add your language,
Thank you.
Mayor Murphy.
Will my second do it?
I call for the question.
Call the question.
So you accept the amendment.
Yes.
Call the question.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second, and an addition.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
I move item 9.
We're adjourned.
Thank you so much. And happy holidays, everyone.
You as well.
Thank you. And I had some documents.